long before astronomy, long before religion, and long before civilization, humans looked up into the night and saw something terrifying. The moon changed shape, stars moved in patterns, meteors burned across the sky, eclipses turned light into omen, and for people who had no answers, the heavens may have felt alive. If you enjoy ancient mysteries like this, like the video and subscribe to the channel, the first thing they see is not beauty, it is exposure. Night falls without warning in a world that offers almost no protection, and the land changes character so completely that it no longer feels like the same place. What had been visible terrain a few moments earlier becomes broken shadow. Familiar paths disappear. The shapes of trees lengthen and merge. Open ground turns uncertain underfoot. The edge of the campfire marks the end of safety, and beyond it the darkness is not empty at all. It is full of movement that cannot be measured, sounds that cannot be placed, and distances that cannot be trusted. Somewhere out there, eyes adjust faster than human eyes do. Teeth move more quietly than human feet can. Claws meet the earth with less sound than breath. A person standing in that darkness thousands of years ago does not look upward first. They listen, they freeze, they wait to learn whether the night will pass over them or come closer. In that older human world, fear is not a failure of imagination. It is a survival tool sharpened by repetition. For most of human existence, and for the long eras before settled villages, walls, lamps, and written calendars, daylight is the only reliable ally. Sunlight reveals food, tracks, faces, landmarks, and threats. It lets groups coordinate movement and lets hands work with some degree of confidence. Darkness strips that away. It does not merely reduce vision. It breaks the normal order of the senses. Hearing becomes too important. Smell becomes suggestive. Memory becomes uncertain. Even the ground feels less solid when it cannot be seen clearly. Modern people can still feel a trace of this in a forest after sunset or in a rural landscape far from electric light. But for early humans, the feeling is not occasional. It is built into life. Every day ends at the edge of an unknown that returns without asking permission. And above that unknown hangs a sky so large that it must have felt almost unbearable. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, it is easy now to romanticize the prehistoric night as something peaceful, even sacred. In some ways it is. But peace is not the first emotion it offers to a vulnerable primate with poor night vision, thin skin, and young children to protect. The darkness overhead does not soften the danger below, it enlarges it. A clear night reveals a vault of cold stars, endless and sharp, stretching beyond any hill, any season, any known hunting ground. A cloudy night is sometimes worse. Then the sky itself vanishes, and the world seems sealed under a lid of blackness. Either way, early humans live under conditions that make the heavens feel less like scenery and more like an immense presence. The evidence remains incomplete, because thought does not fossilize. But what survives in the record suggests that the human relationship with night begins in vulnerability long before it becomes wonder. That vulnerability is physical before it is symbolic. Humans are unusually visual creatures. Compared with many nocturnal predators, human eyes are poorly suited to darkness. We do not track well at night by sight alone. We do not move especially quietly. We do not smell danger as well as many animals do. We compensate with intelligence, social cooperation, memory, and tools. But those strengths depend on time, communication, and some degree of predictability. Night reduces all three. It shrinks the effective range of coordination, it slows reaction, it lets threats approach from concealment in Ice Age Europe, Pleistocene Africa, or the uplands and coasts of Eurasia where different human groups lived and moved. The cast of predators changes, but the basic equation remains. Lions, hyenas, wolves, leopards, bears, and big cats do not need the night to kill, but the night often helps them. A human group bedding down in the open or in a shallow shelter does not need mythology to fear what darkness hides. Experience is enough. Cold deepens the problem. In many prehistoric settings, nighttime is not just obscure but punishing. Temperatures drop sharply after sunset, especially in dry environments and open steppe landscapes. Wind carries farther when the day's warmth is gone. Fire becomes more than comfort. It is a line between life and exposure, between defended space and undefended space. The campfire is one of the great inventions of the human story, not only because it cooks food or hardens tools, but because it pushes back against the total collapse of confidence that darkness brings. Fire creates a small island of visibility. It gives the group a center. It reveals faces and hands. It allows the old to stay near the young and the strong to watch the perimeter. It may even alter the behavior of predators, though not always enough to remove danger. Around that fire, humans do something more important than simply stay warm. They hold reality together, outside the light. The world disperses into threat and guesswork. This may be one reason why the earliest emotional meaning of the sky is inseparable from the earliest emotional meaning of shelter. To lie under the open heavens is not the same as lying under rock, branches, hide, or woven cover. A cave mouth narrows the world. A simple lean-to gives edges to space. Even a windbreak made of brush offers a psychological fact as well as a physical one. There is an inside, and there is an outside. The night sky presses hardest when no such boundary exists. On open ground, a person can feel not only watched by animals but overshadowed by something far larger and less understandable. Scholars still debate how early symbolic thought emerged from these conditions, but no single explanation fully accounts for why the sky became so powerful in human imagination. Still, the practical roots are hard to ignore. Humans feared what they could not control, and at night the visible sign of that uncontrollable world was above them as much as around them. There is another feature of darkness that matters just as much as predators and cold distortion. Night does not simply conceal, it transforms. Things seen by firelight or starlight do not look like their daytime selves. Rock faces become figures. Moving grass becomes a stalking presence. Trees seem to shift position. Distance becomes unreliable. A ridge that feels manageable by day becomes an enormous wall after sunset. Smoke rises into black air and vanishes. Sparks lift upward and disappear into something that cannot be reached. This is where the sky begins to gather emotional force even before any formal belief exists. It is the place where things go when they leave the human world of touch. Fire fades into it. Breath rises into it on cold nights. Sounds seem to fall from it during storms. Birds vanish into it. The moon changes within it. If a meteor streaks across it, the event is gone before language can hold it. For minds shaped by pattern recognition and survival, this is not neutral. It is the domain of unstable signs. And early human minds are intensely tuned to signs. Long before writing, long before formal science, long before priesthoods or observatories, human survival depends on detecting significance quickly. A bent blade of grass may indicate passing prey. A broken branch may mean another group nearby. A scent on the wind may mark danger. The difference between overreacting and underreacting is not trivial. In such a world, it makes sense that the heavens are not ignored just because they are distant. Distant things still matter if they coincide with changes on the ground. The bright moon alters how far one can see. Certain nights make predators easier to detect, but they also make humans more visible. Darkness varies, shadows vary. The sky is not a fixed ceiling, but an active condition that changes the terms of survival. That alone may have made it feel less like background and more like participant. There is also the question of memory. The night returns every day, yet no two nights are exactly alike. Some are windless and brilliant with stars. Some are moonlit enough to reveal the land in silver outline. Some are moonless and thick, the kind of darkness in which even nearby companions can become voices without faces. For early humans, this repeated variation must have encouraged comparison. The human brain naturally stores these contrasts. Which nights were safer for travel? Which nights brought more animal movement? Which nights seemed colder, stranger, louder, or more exposed? Over generations, observations like these become habits, then expectations, then meaning. The process need not begin with religion. It begins with attention. Once attention fixes on the sky, fear and usefulness become tangled together. Yet the emotional ground layer remains fear, because fear organizes attention more efficiently than awe does. A person who admires the stars survives only if admiration does not distract from danger. A person who fears the conditions of the night, on the other hand, stays close to the group, tends the fire, watches the children, listens for movement, and remembers the sheltering roots by instinct. The sky enters consciousness through that posture of alertness. This may be one of the most important lost experiences in human history. Early humans do not first encounter the heavens as astronomers, poets, or philosophers. They encounter them as exposed animals trying not to die. What makes this even more striking is that humans are never only passive in the face of fear. They adapt, they cluster, they develop rituals of watchfulness before they develop formal ritual in any later sense. A group settling in for the night must decide where to sleep, who remains wakeful, how much fuel to save, where children lie, where tools are placed, what sounds require response, which shelters are trustworthy, whether the moon offers advantage, whether open ground is safer than brush, whether a cave protects or traps. These are technical questions, but they are also emotional ones, and all of them unfold under the sky, night after night, generation after generation. The heavens become associated with the most serious hours humans face, the hours of uncertainty, listening, guarding, and endurance. Some of the lesser-known clues to this older world come not from dramatic artifacts, but from the logic of human adaptation itself. Archaeologists can trace the use of hearths, the repeated occupation of shelters, the strategic choice of defensible places, and the long continuity of fire use among ancient human groups. None of these proves exactly what a person felt while looking upward after sunset, but together they point toward a simple truth. Night demanded preparation. Preparation implies anticipation. Anticipation, repeated often enough in dangerous conditions, becomes emotional structure. Fear of the night sky may not have begun as fear of stars themselves. It may have begun as fear of everything that arrived with darkness and everything the sky seemed to govern from above. That distinction matters because it reminds us not to project later ideas backward too quickly. The first human fear of the night sky is probably not about abstract cosmology. It is about dependency. Darkness changes the odds of survival, and the visible emblem of darkness is the sky. A clouded sky removes light. A moonlit sky gives it back unevenly. A star-filled sky reveals immense scale but no mercy. The evidence remains incomplete. And scholars still debate how far symbolic interpretation goes in the earliest periods. But the setting itself is unmistakable. Human beings spend vast stretches of their history beneath a dome they cannot explain, during hours when their senses are at their weakest and the world around them is at its least forgiving. So the story begins there, not with temples, constellations, or legends written down much later, but with a circle of light on the ground and a darkness pressing in from all sides. Around that circle sit human beings who already know more than enough to be afraid. They know what hunts at night. They know how quickly warmth leaves the body. They know how distance turns deceptive after sunset. They know that children cry more easily in darkness, that elders hear things others miss, that a single snapped twig can reorder every heartbeat in the group, and above all of that, whether clear or clouded, luminous or blank, the sky remains vast, cold, changeable, and far beyond reach, long before it becomes a map, a clock, or a realm of gods. It is first a ceiling over danger. That is where the fear takes root, and from that root almost everything else will grow. Once the fire is established and the group has settled into whatever fragile arrangement the night permits, another fact becomes impossible to ignore. The darkness above is not truly dark. Away from cloud cover and far from the haze of modern illumination, the prehistoric sky is crowded with light. It is not a thin scattering of a few visible stars, but a dense field so rich that the spaces between constellations are filled with dimmer points, drifting bands, and pale luminous dust. The Milky Way arches overhead with enough clarity to seem almost like weather made permanent. In dry seasons, in high places, in open plains, along coasts far from settlement, the heavens would have appeared not empty but saturated. To modern eyes, that kind of sky can feel miraculous. To early humans, seeing it night after night, it may have felt less like a spectacle than a condition of existence, an immense second landscape suspended above the first. And because it is visible only when the world below becomes least secure, it arrives already entangled with unease. This is one of the deepest differences between ancient experience and modern imagination. Most people now meet the stars occasionally, under special circumstances, with prior expectations of beauty. Early humans meet them as part of the ordinary structure of danger, rest, and waiting. Children grow into consciousness with them overhead. The old die beneath them. Migrations unfold under them. Storms erase them. Winter sharpens them. Summer softens them. Their appearance changes with latitude, season, and weather. But they never lose their authority. They're too numerous to dismiss, too regular to forget, and too far beyond human touch to master. If darkness on the ground creates anxiety, the brightness above intensifies it in a peculiar way. It suggests that the night is not merely absence but exposure to a larger order that does not concern itself with human comfort. The sheer scale of that order must have pressed hard on the human mind. During the day, the horizon limits attention. Hills, trees, cliffs, grasslands, rivers, and moving animals keep perception local. Even wide landscapes have boundaries that the body can understand. At night, the sky destroys those boundaries. Human beings remain on the same patch of earth, but their senses are forced into contact with distances that cannot be walked and lights that cannot be reached. A person can know every stone around a hearth and still feel utterly small under a sky that extends in every direction beyond measure. The effect is not automatically spiritual in any latest formal sense. It is more basic than that. It is a confrontation with disproportion. The body is warm for the moment. The fire crackles. Companions sleep nearby. But overhead stretches something so vast that it makes all immediate arrangements feel temporary. What survives in the record suggests that humans are exceptionally sensitive to repeated visual patterns, and the night sky is the greatest repeated pattern most prehistoric people ever encounter. Certain bright stars rise in familiar places, others vanish for part of the year. The great luminous band overhead shifts its angle with the seasons. Some lights wander unlike the others, though recognizing that distinction probably takes long observation. The moon swells and thins. The horizon catches certain stars before dawn in one season but not another. This repetition matters because the human brain is not content merely to see. It compares, it stores, it anticipates. Even without mathematics, early humans are capable of noticing recurrence. In fact, lives dependent on migration, hunting, gathering, and climate likely sharpen that ability. The sky does not need to be understood scientifically to become unforgettable. It only needs to be seen often enough, and tied often enough to life on the ground. Yet repeated patterns do not immediately comfort. They can just as easily deepen the sense that the world is governed by forces outside human negotiation. The stars rise whether anyone is ready for them or not. The moon changes shape without explanation. Familiar arrangements return, but they do so according to timings no one has chosen. Early humans could probably rely on many practical rhythms in their environment, but the sky presents those rhythms on a scale both elegant and indifferent. No single explanation fully accounts for how that indifference was felt, because emotional life leaves only indirect traces, but the conditions are easy to reconstruct. A group watching the stars over many years would notice order, yet order itself can be unnerving when it comes from a source beyond reach. The heavens do not behave like prey, weather, or rival groups. They are stable enough to seem intentional and distant enough to seem untouchable. This is where fear begins to acquire a different texture. It is no longer only fear of what hides in darkness. It is fear mixed with attention, the kind that lingers after immediate danger has not materialized. Predators may not approach the camp. The fire may burn steadily. The children may sleep, and still someone remains awake, looking upward into a field of lights that neither blinks nor speaks but also never goes away. The mind under such conditions can move in two directions at once. It can register the sky as a practical source of light and orientation, and at the same time experience it as unsettling because it is too orderly, too large, and too detached from human need. This dual response may be one of the foundations of later sky symbolism. Humans do not reserve meaning for things that are merely useful. They reserve the deepest meaning for things that are useful and disturbing at the same time. A lesser-known but important detail is just how much natural darkness varies even when there is no moon. Starlight, air clarity, snow cover, pale stone, sand, and moisture in the atmosphere can all alter how a landscape appears at night. In some environments, the sky is so bright with stars and the Milky Way that it casts a faint perceptible light across the ground. In others, especially under heavy cloud, darkness becomes nearly absolute. Early humans would have known these differences intimately. A brilliant star field might help with movement or orientation, but also magnify the feeling of being visible in open country. A clouded sky removes celestial detail altogether, and with it any sense of wider order. So even within darkness there are gradations of confidence and dread. The night sky is not one thing. It is a changing psychological atmosphere. Movement overhead likely made this atmosphere even more powerful. Unlike the daytime sun, whose course is overwhelming but almost too bright to observe directly, stars and the moon invite long watching. Anyone awake for enough hours sees them shift. They are not fixed where they first appear. They climb, lean westward, sink, and vanish. This slow movement is crucial. A sky that stayed perfectly still might be impressive, but a sky that moves announces activity. Early humans could not fail to notice that the heavens are in motion even when the land is quiet. Fires settle to embers, animals go silent, companions breathe in sleep, and still the sky changes. That alone can generate a sense that the world remains active beyond the limits of human control. Scholars still debate exactly when humans began treating celestial motion as something to track carefully rather than merely witness, but the evidence of cognition, memory, and adaptation suggests that the transition from passive seeing to deliberate noticing likely began very early. Then there are the lights that do not behave like stars. Planets, though unnamed in the distant prehistoric past, would sometimes appear unusually bright and shift position over longer periods in ways that attentive observers could detect. Some stars twinkle sharply while others shine steadier depending on atmospheric conditions and brightness. The Milky Way itself can look like smoke, river, dust, pathway, wound, or seam, depending on the eye that sees it and the culture that later tries to explain it. None of this requires fantasy to become memorable. It is enough that the heavens offer endless visual irregularities within an underlying pattern. Human beings are built to search for significance inside such fields. Sometimes that search saves lives. Sometimes it produces mistaken inference. Most likely it does both. But either way, the sky becomes a canvas onto which the mind cannot help projecting importance. This tendency is not a flaw. It is part of what makes humans human. Pattern-seeking under uncertainty is one of our oldest habits. When the cost of missing a real threat is high, minds become biased toward detection. A rustle may be wind, but assuming wind every time can be fatal. The same cognitive style may help explain why the night sky becomes emotionally charged so early. Strange alignments, unusual brightness, unfamiliar appearances near the horizon, and nights of exceptional clarity would all stand out. Some events would later prove mundane, others would correspond with seasonal shifts, animal migrations, or weather changes often enough to seem predictive. The result is not random superstition appearing out of nowhere. It is a practical intelligence living so long with a recurring, overwhelming visual system that meaning accumulates almost automatically. And still, usefulness alone cannot explain the depth of the response. There is something else in the experience of the night sky that seems to press toward thought, beyond immediate survival. The visible stars are not merely nearby markers, they imply unreachable distance. The Milky Way is not simply a bright band, it looks like structure without obvious purpose. The moon is not only illumination, it changes shape while remaining itself. These are cognitive provocations. They present the mind with facts that are stable enough to be remembered, and strange enough never to be fully absorbed. A human group does not need language for astronomy to feel this pressure. It is enough to live beneath the same sky across childhood, adulthood, and old age, and to realize that while human lives alter quickly, the heavens retain their own rhythm. The contrast can be chilling. Fires die in hours, weather shifts in days, bodies weaken in years, but the stars return with an authority that seems older than memory. This may be why the sky becomes a site of both dread and orientation long before it becomes a site of explanation. Early humans probably learn where they are, in part, by what is above them: coastlines, mountain gaps, open plains, and desert routes, each present different night horizons. Certain stars may help maintain direction during movement at dawn or dusk. Certain seasons may become associated with certain sky appearances, but with this growing familiarity comes a deeper entanglement. The more the sky is watched, the more it matters. The more it matters, the harder it is to treat as neutral, a thing that helps determine movement. Time and expectation acquires moral and emotional weight almost by default. It begins as environment. It becomes presence. So the prehistoric night is not a blank darkness occasionally pierced by stars. It is an overwhelming visual field that arrives exactly when human beings are at their most physically vulnerable and psychologically alert. That combination may be one of the great engines of meaning in human history. Fear alone does not create lasting systems of thought. Wonder alone does not either. But fear under repeated exposure to pattern can. A sky too empty would have inspired little. A sky too chaotic would have taught little. The actual night sky offered something more powerful, dazzling abundant, structured just enough to be remembered, just strange enough to disturb, and just constant enough to become central. Long before humans set stories among the stars, they live under a brilliance that is impossible to ignore, and in learning to endure that brilliance, they begin the long process of turning terror into attention. Of all the things that move through the prehistoric sky, nothing is more intimate than the moon. The stars are vast and countless. The Milky Way is immense, and rare celestial events arrive too suddenly to become part of ordinary life at first. But the moon returns with a rhythm that can be felt within a single lifetime again and again, in the same way hunger, bleeding, tides, and sleep can be felt. It is close enough to seem almost involved in earthly affairs, bright enough to transform the land, and unstable enough to be unnerving. A full moon does not simply decorate the night, it remakes it. Paths reappear in pale outline, water glints, open plains are exposed, shadows sharpen, faces can be recognized from farther away. The world becomes visible again, though not in the familiar logic of day. Then, night by night, that borrowed visibility begins to fail. The bright disk narrows, weakens, becomes a curved fragment, then vanishes. And after vanishing, it returns. For a human mind already tuned to threat and pattern, this is not a minor detail. It is one of the most dramatic cycles in the natural world. The sun rises and sets with great consistency, but its shape does not seem to change. The moon does. It grows without being born in any obvious sense, shrinks without visibly being destroyed, disappears without staying dead, and comes back without explanation. It is both regular and strange, predictable and alarming. That combination may be why the moon becomes, in many later cultures, one of the earliest and most symbolically charged celestial bodies. But long before formal myth, the moon likely matters because it alters survival conditions directly. Its phases change how far humans can see at night, how visible they themselves become, how animals behave, and how secure a camp or movement route feels. The evidence remains incomplete. But what survives in the logic of hunter-gatherer life strongly suggests that moonlight is not a poetic extra. It is operational. A bright full moon can offer real advantages. It extends the usable edges of the night. It allows movement after sunset with less risk of stumbling blindly. It may make it easier to monitor surroundings, detect predators at greater distance, or travel through open terrain when daytime heat is punishing. Some animal species alter their behavior under strong moonlight, and early humans, watching prey and predators closely, would likely have noticed such changes even if they could not explain them in modern scientific terms. At the same time, the benefits are uneven. Brightness helps humans see, but it also helps other creatures see humans. A moonlit night on exposed ground may feel safer in one sense, and more dangerous in another. It reveals and betrays at the same time. That double nature gives the moon unusual psychological force, unlike the stars, which remain far and collectively overwhelming. The moon behaves like a singular actor whose changing presence has consequences, and those consequences are dramatic enough to leave emotional traces even without written memory. Think of the difference between a moonless night and a full one in a landscape without artificial light. On one night, the world closes down almost completely. Depth collapses, movement slows, the group draws tighter around fire and shelter. On another, the same terrain lies half revealed in silver gradients. Hills are visible. Tree lines return. Water surfaces gleam like metal. The horizon sharpens. Even the behavior of the group may shift. People speak differently in visible darkness than in total obscurity. They may linger awake longer, move farther from the fire, scan the land with more confidence, or feel a different kind of exposure. If a child grows up experiencing this cycle month after month, year after year, then the moon is not simply part of the sky. It becomes one of the main regulators of how night feels. This is where fear begins to merge with dependence. The moon offers help, but help that cannot be summoned. It gives light and then takes it away. It returns, but only in its own time. Early humans could learn its broad rhythm through repetition, yet that does not remove its strangeness. In fact, repeated observation may deepen it. A thing that changes according to a pattern no one controls acquires authority. Scholars still debate how early humans conceptualize cyclical celestial events, and no single explanation fully accounts for the emotional texture of that experience. But it is difficult to imagine that the moon's visible transformations left people indifferent. It is too large, too bright, too changeable, and too influential on the appearance of the world below. There is another possible layer here, one that later traditions make very explicit even if the earliest evidence is indirect. Human bodies also have rhythms, sleep cycles, reproductive cycles, bleeding, migration timing, and the seasonal pulse of food availability all create a life organized by recurrence. In many cultures much later, the moon becomes entangled with fertility, menstruation, pregnancy, and feminine power. Though the relationships are culturally varied and often more symbolic than biologically exact, it would be risky to project those later ideas too cleanly into deep prehistory. Still, the possibility cannot be dismissed that recurrent human bodily experiences and recurrent lunar change gradually became associated in memory. Even if the timing was not always precise, the resemblance between visible celestial cycling and visible human cycling may have encouraged symbolic connection. What survives in the record suggests that humans are unusually disposed to bind recurring external patterns to recurring internal ones. The moon also affects water in ways that coastal and estuarine communities, or those living near tidal zones, could hardly fail to notice over long spans of time. Tides rise and fall in relation to lunar position, and while early humans would not know the physics, repeated exposure could reveal practical correlation. Shorelines change, Shellfish-gathering windows shift. Water reaches different marks on rock and sand. Crossing places alter. Fish behavior may vary in such settings. The moon's influence extends beyond illumination into the very edges of subsistence. A bright disk overhead that also seems linked to the breathing motion of the sea is not a trivial object. It becomes part of the architecture of survival, and if its appearances coincide with stronger tides, nighttime brightness, and changed access to food, then the moon gathers layers of significance far beyond simple visibility. A lesser-known but revealing detail is that moonlight can distort depth and texture in ways that are both beautiful and deceptive. Under strong moonlight, landscapes often appear flatter, sharper, and more spectral than under sunlight. Distances can still be misjudged. Faces can look altered. Pale stones can seem animate. Water can resemble land, and land can resemble water from certain angles. For early humans, this means the moon does not merely restore the world to usefulness. It produces a version of the world that is legible but uncanny. The familiar returns, though changed. This may have reinforced the sense that lunar light belongs to a different order than daylight. It reveals selectively. It seems to touch some surfaces while swallowing others. It turns moving animals into silhouettes and standing trees into figures. It lets people see, but not comfortably. The moon's disappearances would have been especially powerful. A new moon or heavily obscured moon does not simply reduce brightness. It removes a major presence from the sky. If the full moon can seem almost companion-like in its regular return, its absence can feel like abandonment. Nights become deeper, narrower, and more dependent on fire. The contrast may have helped early humans sense time in broader units than day and season alone. The visible waxing and waning create a countable sequence. Even without formal numbering, the eye can register progression: thin crescent, larger crescent, half, swollen disk, full, then decline. Some scholars have argued that notched bones and other marked objects from later prehistoric periods may reflect lunar counting or other recurring observations, though interpretations remain disputed. Even where the evidence is uncertain, the basic idea is compelling. The moon is one of the few obvious natural clocks visible to anyone who keeps looking up. If so, it may also be one of the first sky phenomena to blur the boundary between fear and foresight. A terrifying sky that also yields pattern becomes something humans can begin to anticipate. Anticipation changes emotion, not completely, but significantly. One need not understand the moon's cause to know that its brightness will likely return. One need not solve the cosmos to prepare for darker nights or brighter ones. This is a crucial step in the larger human story. The heavens begin as overwhelming conditions imposed from above, but some part of them, especially the moon, can be watched closely enough to produce expectation. And expectation is the seed of control, even when control is still mostly illusion. A group that senses the rhythm of moonlight is slightly less trapped inside pure uncertainty. It cannot command the sky, but it can learn to live with its changes. The emotional consequence is profound. A changing moon teaches that the sky has phases, not just moods. It withdraws and returns. It can be feared without being purely random. This may help explain why lunar symbolism becomes so persistent in human societies later on. The moon is not merely seen, it is endured, relied upon, and interpreted across generations. It appears during births, hunts, migrations, deaths, storms, and periods of hunger. It is there when children first become aware of night beyond the fire. It is there when bodies are buried. It is there when groups travel in uncertain terrain or sit awake through dangerous hours. Its cycle overlays itself on human memory until recurrence becomes meaning. And unlike the stars, which require the mind to grasp the many, the moon invites the mind to focus on the one. One body changes, one body brightens, one body disappears, one body comes back. That simplicity matters. It gives the night a face, in a sense, though not yet literally. A sky that is otherwise crowded and immense suddenly contains a central actor whose transformations can be followed with the naked eye by anyone. No advanced abstraction is needed. Attention alone is enough. So if early humans first feared the night as a domain of exposure, and then endured the stars as a vast order beyond reach, the moon may have been the first thing in the heavens to feel both intimate and powerful at once. It does not lessen the fear of the night sky. It personalizes it. It gives the darkness a rhythm, and in doing so it teaches humans one of their oldest and most important lessons. What terrifies can also return predictably, and what returns predictably can begin to shape memory, ritual, and the first fragile sense that even the heavens might be read. Once the moon teaches that the sky can change in recognizable ways, the stars begin to reveal something even stranger. They do not merely decorate the darkness, they return in sequences. Certain bright points rise before dawn during one part of the year and then disappear into the sun's glare for months. Entire constellations stand high in one season and low in another. The Milky Way tilts differently as the year turns. The same ridgeline that frames a cluster of stars in cold weather may hold only darkness in warmer months. At first, these changes might seem subtle beside the immediate business of survival, but prehistoric life is built on repetition, and repetition is where patterns become impossible to ignore. The group that spends year after year moving through the same valleys, coastlines, forests, grasslands, or upland routes does not encounter the sky as a random display. It encounters it as a shifting order that keeps reappearing above the equally shifting demands of hunger, migration, mating seasons, ripening plants, freezing nights, and returning game. That slow recognition matters because it transforms fear without dissolving it. A terrifying sky that also contains clues becomes more than a source of dread. It becomes a field of information. Early humans do not need formal astronomy to notice that some stars belong to certain times of year any more than they need formal botany to notice that certain plants emerge after rain. Human beings are extremely good at linking recurring signs to recurring outcomes, especially when food, movement, and safety depend on doing so. What survives in the record suggests that long before any monuments are aligned to solstices or any calendars are carved with intent, people are already living inside seasonal intelligence. The sky is part of that intelligence because it is one of the few things visible across large distances and remembered across many lifetimes in roughly the same way. This does not mean the process is neat or immediate. The heavens are complex, and no single explanation fully accounts for how early humans first separated useful pattern from overwhelming abundance. More likely, the learning is gradual and uneven. Some observations remain local, some are forgotten, some are preserved by habit rather than theory. But over generations, very practical associations can take root. A certain star or cluster appears in the east before dawn, not long before herds begin moving through a familiar corridor. Another set of stars climbs into prominence during a season of cold, hunger, or dangerous travel. The changing night sky begins to echo the changing year. And once that echo is noticed often enough, the stars stop being only distant lights and start becoming signals. For mobile foragers, this would have been especially important. Human groups living by hunting, fishing, gathering, and opportunistic movement do not survive by reacting only to the present moment. They survive by anticipating. They need to know where water is likely to remain, when certain coasts or rivers become productive, when migrating animals are expected, when particular fruits, seeds, tubers, or shellfish are worth the effort, when storms are common, when cold becomes dangerous, when crossing routes are open, and when they are not. Much of this knowledge comes from landscape and memory on the ground, but the sky offers something the ground cannot: a repeating system visible from multiple places. If a group learns that the return of certain stars coincides with shifts in weather or animal behavior, then the terrifying heavens have begun to yield a kind of order that can be carried in the mind. There is profound irony in this. The same sky that makes humans feel small may also help them extend themselves beyond immediate perception. A star rising before dawn can suggest that a season is arriving before the temperature fully changes. A familiar cluster standing high at night can confirm where in the yearly cycle the group stands. The heavens become a way of remembering the future, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Scholars still debate how early and how consciously such correlations were tracked, and the evidence remains incomplete. Yet ethnographic parallels from later non-industrial societies show just how powerful sky-based seasonal knowledge can be. This does not prove deep prehistoric beliefs in detail, but it makes one thing plausible. Humans did not need observatories to understand that the sky and the year spoke to each other. And still, usefulness does not remove the emotional charge. In some ways it deepens it. A thing that can warn, guide, or forecast begins to matter more, not less. If the appearance of certain stars is linked to coming abundance, scarcity, danger, rain, cold, fish runs, nesting seasons, or migrations, then those stars are no longer neutral features of the night. They are tied to hope and anxiety. A failed expectation becomes painful. A correct one becomes memorable. The stars begin to enter the same mental world as food sources and death. This may be one reason the heavens become morally and ritually weighty in so many later societies. It is not only that humans admire them, it is that lives slowly become entangled with them. There is also the matter of direction. In open environments, especially deserts, steppe, coastlines, and broad plains, the stars can help maintain bearings during travel when landmarks are sparse or when movement happens in cooler hours near dusk, dawn, or under moonlight. The North Star as a precise navigational anchor is not a timeless constant due to precession, and in deep prehistory the celestial pole is marked by different stars less neatly than today. But the broader principle remains. The sky offers stable, large-scale reference points. A person who notices that certain stars rise and set in consistent directions possesses something extremely valuable, a way to orient beyond immediate terrain. This is a lesser known but important detail in the story of early sky fear. What terrifies from above may also help prevent a group from becoming lost below. That combination of dread and guidance is one of the most human patterns in this entire story. Humans rarely stop fearing what they also depend on. The sea, fire, storms, animals, and winter all show the same logic. The night sky joins that category not because it acts directly in the same way, but because its visible changes become entangled with life's turning points. A clear, cold sky may promise one kind of weather. The absence of familiar stars at a certain time may suggest another season is near. Dawn positions matter. Horizon points matter. Repeated observation slowly sorts the heavens into memory. around campfires. Knowledge like this may first pass not as abstract teaching but as practical comment, story, warning, or seasonal expectation. A child learns that when certain lights return, the world below will change soon. That lesson is half survival and half worldview. This may also help explain why constellations, when they emerge much later in documented cultures, so often carry the forms of animals, tools, hunters, birds, fish, or beings tied to seasonal cycles. The shapes themselves vary dramatically across societies, which is a reminder that the stars do not force a single story on anyone, but the impulse behind the stories may go back very far. Human minds bind visual patterns to what matters most on Earth. If particular star groups return when certain animals migrate, or certain ecological events recur, then the sky becomes a mnemonic landscape. It stores the year in visible form. What scholars can say with confidence is limited, because the earliest symbolic interpretations do not survive clearly. What can be inferred, however, is that repeated celestial order would have been too useful to remain emotionally empty. At the same time, the order is never perfect from a human perspective. Clouds intervene, weather obscures, horizons differ from place to place, groups migrate, climate shifts over centuries. A pattern useful in one region may be less useful in another. Rare disruptions, such as comets, unusual atmospheric conditions, or brilliant meteors, would be especially disturbing precisely because they interrupt a sky that has begun to feel dependable in certain ways. But even before those shocks arrive, there is tension built into the stars themselves. They seem fixed, yet they move. They seem eternal, yet they vanish seasonally. They suggest stability, yet that stability is visible only through change, for a species already struggling to impose meaning on a dangerous world. This is fertile ground for both practical intelligence and proto-mythic thought. One of the most significant transformations in human consciousness may happen quietly here. The sky ceases to be only an external power and becomes a memory system. Not written memory, not measured memory, but lived memory. A person does not simply see a star cluster. They remember what followed last time it stood there. They remember cold, or fish, or wind, or grazing herds, or movement to another valley. The heavens become layered with previous years. That accumulation changes the emotional texture of night. Fear is still present, because darkness still means exposure, predators, uncertainty, and cold. But alongside fear comes recognition. Recognition softens panic and sharpens attention. It creates the first small bridge between being ruled by the sky and learning from it. And that bridge may be one of the foundations of civilization long before civilization exists. To anticipate a season is to plan. To plan is to store, move, prepare, gather, warn, and teach. Even the smallest increase in predictability can transform group survival. If the stars help encode seasonal knowledge, then the night sky has already begun doing something extraordinary. It is helping humans stretch awareness across time. The heavens are no longer only what looms overhead during danger. They are becoming part of the machinery by which people connect present action to future conditions. In that sense, the terrifying sky starts to teach the earliest lesson of order the world changes, but not always at random. So the stars do not replace fear with comfort. They do something more subtle and more important. They make fear useful. They turn vigilance into memory and memory into pattern. Under their recurring rise and disappearance, human beings begin to notice that the year has a shape, that the land has rhythms, and that the immense lights above may offer hints about what is coming next. This is not yet science in the later sense, and it is certainly not certainty. The evidence remains incomplete. Many associations would have been mistaken, local, or impossible to verify, but enough of them would have worked often enough to matter, and once that happened, the night sky could never again be just terror. It had become a vast and unsettling source of order, a place where danger and guidance were written together in light. Then, just as the sky begins to seem readable, it turns violent again. That may be the most important emotional rhythm in the prehistoric relationship with the heavens. Order appears, patterns emerge, confidence grows in small and fragile ways, and then something happens above that does not fit the expected sequence at all. A meteor tears across the darkness in a fraction of a second, brighter than any star, vanishing before the mind can decide what it has seen. A shower of such lights arrives unexpectedly, not one but many, as if the sky itself is shedding sparks. A comet appears and remains, hanging over the horizon or climbing higher night after night like a wound that does not close. The moon, which has already taught humans to expect disappearance and return, suffers a different kind of assault during an eclipse, dimming or darkening in ways no ordinary cycle prepares the eye for. Rare glows spread across the northern sky, curtains of pale fire shifting in silence. Even the sun can be wounded, day can fail. The heavens, which had begun to offer hints of order, suddenly reveal that their order has limits, and that what seems stable for years can still be interrupted by something unfamiliar, brilliant, and deeply unsettling. For early humans, events like these would not have been curiosities set safely behind explanation. They would have been shocks in the strongest sense of the word. Modern people encounter celestial events with forecasts, diagrams, eclipse glasses, and the reassurance of scientific cause. Prehistoric observers have no such distance. They possess memory, attention, and comparison, but not the protective framework of modern astronomy. So when the moon changes in its familiar way, that can become manageable, when it darkens at the wrong time, or glows red, or loses part of itself while still full, the effect is entirely different. A regularity has been violated. The very thing that made the sky tolerable was recurrence, and now recurrence fails. That failure matters not simply because the event is visually strange, but because it attacks the oldest human defense against fear, the sense that tomorrow might resemble yesterday closely enough to survive. Lunar eclipses may have been especially powerful for this reason. The moon is intimate, singular, and repeatedly visible in a way that the stars are not. It is the night's great companion and regulator. To see it dim, vanish partially, or turn dark red would be more than unusual. It would feel like corruption. The colour alone matters. A reddened moon is not just absent light. It looks altered in essence, as if smoke, blood, or shadow has entered it. Scholars still debate the emotional meaning ancient observers attached to such events in the deep prehistoric past, because the evidence remains incomplete. But later recorded cultures across the world often treat eclipses as moments of danger, attack, pollution, or cosmic disorder. That does not prove an unbroken line back into early human experience, yet it strongly suggests that the visual force of an eclipse is sufficient on its own to trigger alarm. A sky body thought familiar suddenly behaves like something wounded or consumed. Solar eclipses would be even more overwhelming, though also far rarer and more geographically limited in their total forms. The daytime world, normally governed by the unwavering confidence of the sun, begins to dim, Shadows alter, temperature drops. Birds fall silent or behave as if evening has arrived too early. The horizon can take on a strange, flattened glow. And then, for those in the right path, the sun itself is swallowed. No single explanation fully accounts for what such an event would have meant to humans without astronomy. But terror is the most reasonable starting point. Day is the foundation of security. The sun's reliability is so complete that its interruption feels like a direct assault on reality. Unlike ordinary sunset, which comes gradually and predictably, an eclipse occurs out of sequence. It arrives while the mind still expects day to continue. That breach of expectation may be one of the purest forms of cosmic fear humans can experience. Meteors belong to a different category of shock because they are sudden and directional. They move with speed the fixed stars never show. A bright fireball crossing the sky is almost impossible not to read as action. It starts somewhere, travels somewhere, and ends abruptly. Some leave persistent glowing trails. Some appear green, white, or orange. Some fragment. A few may even produce sound after the visual event, deepening the sense that something has crossed between heaven and earth. In a world where human minds are trained to treat fast movement as significant, these events would stand out with enormous force. Most meteors are harmless to observers on the ground, but harmlessness is not the point. They look like intrusion. The heavens, usually remote and elevated, suddenly seem to throw something across the human field of vision, and that makes the boundary between above and below feel less secure. Meteor showers add repetition to this disturbance. One streak might be remembered as a singular sign. Many streaks in succession imply a sky in motion on a larger scale. Certain annual showers, if observed over generations, may have become associated with particular seasons, but that very recurrence could still preserve their unsettling character. The sky-raining light is not ordinary even when it happens predictably. It looks like instability at the highest level. The same would be true, perhaps even more so, of bolides or exceptionally bright fireballs. A rare event remembered across a region could become attached to stories, warnings, or ritual interpretations long after its physical cause was forgotten. Here again, the path from fear to meaning is not mysterious. It is built from memorable shocks that demand explanation simply because they do not fit familiar pattern. Comets are different again because they persist. A meteor is over too quickly to study. A comet hangs there night after night, changing position slowly, growing more obvious, perhaps developing a visible tail that stretches across part of the sky. It is one of the most uncanny sights available to the naked eye. Unlike the moon, it does not belong to an obvious cycle. Unlike the stars, it is not part of the known seasonal architecture. It appears as a stranger. That strangeness may be one reason comets are so often treated in later literate civilizations as omens of upheaval, death, kingship, famine, or war. Early humans would not frame those ideas in the same political terms, but the emotional logic is easy to imagine. A new object has entered the sky. It remains. It changes the appearance of the heavens without permission. It resists classification. In a worldview where stability is precious, such an arrival would not feel neutral. Auroras, where visible, add yet another dimension to ancient sky fear. To those living at higher latitudes or during periods of strong solar activity, the northern sky can fill with wavering curtains, arcs, and luminous forms that seem neither cloud nor star nor flame. They move silently and unpredictably. They can brighten, fade, ripple, and spread in colours ranging from pale white to green, red, and violet. For people who know storms, clouds, moonlight, and starlight intimately, auroras belong to none of those categories. They are atmospheres behaving like fire, because they are relatively rare in many inhabited regions. They would likely have arrived without a framework of expectation, except among groups accustomed to them. Even then, familiarity does not erase their strangeness. What survives in ethnographic traditions much later suggests that auroras often carry strong supernatural or moral interpretations. That is unsurprising. They look like the sky has become active in a new and almost living way. One lesser known but important factor is how these events interact with already existing fear on the ground. A celestial anomaly does not occur in an abstract mental space. It happens while people are already alert to weather, hunger, predators, illness, conflict, and death. If a strange event above coincides by chance with a storm, a failed hunt, a sickness, a death in the group, or unusual animal behavior, the association becomes hard to forget. Human minds are built to bind memorable events together, especially under uncertainty. Sometimes those associations are false, sometimes they are accidental, yet once formed, they can become durable. This is one pathway by which rare sky events may have entered the earliest layers of omen thinking. Not because early humans were irrational, but because they were trying to detect meaningful correlation in a dangerous world where ignoring possible warnings carried enormous cost. This is also why the sky's violence may have mattered more than the sky's beauty. A beautiful star field can inspire awe and perhaps calm in some circumstances, but a disrupted sky demands response. People point, they speak, they gather others to look, they remember where they were. They compare the event with previous nights. Those who are older may search memory for precedent. Those who are younger may absorb the fear in the faces and voices around them. A rare celestial event becomes social immediately. It spreads through the group not only as perception but as shared tension. In that moment, the heavens are no longer simply overhead, they are intervening. And once humans begin to treat intervention from above as meaningful, the sky becomes morally alive. Not literally at first, perhaps, and not yet in the formal theological sense, but it acquires agency in the mind. A sky that merely repeats can be watched. A sky that sometimes breaks its own apparent rules can be interpreted. This is the crucial shift. The unusual event does not erase the value of ordinary patterns. It intensifies it by contrast. Now, the moon's regular phases are not just useful. They are the standard against which eclipse becomes terrifying. The star's steady return is not just orienting, it is the stable field against which comets and meteors become alarming intrusions. The more the sky has been domesticated by observation, the more shocking its exceptions become. So the prehistoric heavens do not move in a simple line from terror to understanding. They move in cycles of partial familiarity and renewed fear. Humans learn the moon, and then the moon bleeds. They learn the stars, and then the stars are crossed by fire. They come to trust daylight, and then day goes dark. These are not small embellishments to the story. They are likely central to why the sky remains such a powerful source of myth, ritual, authority, and long memory in later human societies. Before it could become a calendar, it had to remain dangerous. Before it could become sacred, it had to prove that it was not safely predictable. The heavens gave humans pattern, but they never gave them complete reassurance. And perhaps that was the most formative lesson of all that order exists. But it is never guaranteed, and when it breaks above you, every fear on the ground returns at once. The violence overhead does not remain neatly separated from the violence in the air. For early humans, the sky is not divided into clean categories called astronomy and weather. It is one continuous realm above the body, a changing ceiling from which light appears. Darkness deepens, winds gather, and destruction can suddenly descend. Lightning does not arrive as a scientific discharge between cloud and ground. It arrives as blinding force from above, faster than sight can prepare for it, bright enough to turn night into day for a fraction of a second and loud enough to shake the chest after the light is gone. Thunder follows, not as a familiar noise in the modern sense, but as something immense and disembodied, rolling through darkness from no visible mouth. In such a world, the sky does not merely watch, it strikes. This matters because storms collapse distance. The stars may feel remote, the moon high and untouchable, but lightning reaches the earth. It hits trees, grasslands, ridgelines, water, animals, perhaps even people. It starts fires, it breaks branches, it throws shadows in violent directions. A night of storm is one of the most complete sensory assaults prehistoric humans can experience. Wind rises first, perhaps, shifting scent and temperature. Then clouds erase the stars. The moon vanishes. Darkness thickens, but not evenly. The world becomes expectant. Air presses differently on the skin. Hair lifts. Animals grow restless. Then a white crack tears open the blackness above, and for one impossible instant the entire landscape appears in cruel detail before being swallowed again. After that comes the delay, and then the impact of sound. Thunder is not merely heard, it is endured. To a human group already conditioned to treat the night sky as a source of danger, storms would have reinforced the idea that whatever exists above is not passive. Scholars still debate how early humans mentally organized different kinds of sky phenomena, and the evidence remains incomplete. But no single explanation fully accounts for just how powerful thunder and lightning must have been in shaping emotional life. A meteor is rare, an eclipse is unforgettable, but infrequent. Storms, by contrast, are recurrent. They belong to ordinary life often enough to structure expectation, yet they never become fully tame. Even modern people feel a reflexive jolt at nearby thunder or a lightning strike too close for comfort. Strip away shelter, grounded buildings, weather forecasts, and scientific explanation, and that reflex grows into something much larger. It becomes a lesson repeated across generations that the heavens can become aggressive without warning. Lightning also has a peculiar relationship to fire, and that connection may have given it special importance. Fire, in human hands, is warmth, defense, cooking, hardened tools, social gathering, and the fragile reclaiming of order at night. Lightning is fire without human control. It is the sky making its own version of the thing humans need most. In some regions and time periods, natural wildfires sparked by lightning would have been a recurring part of ecological life, reshaping vegetation, driving animals, clearing brush, and perhaps providing opportunities for scavenging or hunting in recently burned terrain. Early humans could have observed this double truth very clearly. Fire is salvation when contained and terror when released from above. That alone makes storms more than mere bad weather. They become demonstrations that the power humans rely on also belongs to a higher and less predictable domain. There is a lesser-known emotional detail here that is easy to miss. Thunder often continues after the lightning is gone, rolling across the land in waves, as if the sky is speaking after the strike itself. Human minds are built to search for agency in sound, especially sound without visible source. A predator growls from somewhere, A rival group calls across a distance. Branches crack under moving weight. In all these cases, sound implies an actor. Thunder breaks that expectation. It is vast, mobile, and often impossible to locate precisely. It can seem close when it is not, distant when it is near, singular or layered, answering itself from hill to hill. For early humans, that may have made storms feel less like events and more like encounters. The heavens were not just changing, they were declaring themselves. And storms alter behavior on the ground in immediate ways. People crowd closer to shelter if any exists. Fires must be protected or relit. Children need calming. Movement becomes dangerous. Open areas may become exposed, but dense cover may be risky too if branches snap or predators shift their routes. Watercourses swell. Trails vanish into mud. The familiar advantages of moonlight and starlight disappear behind cloud. Once again, the sky dictates terms. This is one of the strongest recurring themes in the prehistoric experience of night. Human beings do not control the conditions in which they must survive. They negotiate with them. They adapt. They anticipate where possible. But on storm nights especially, the hierarchy becomes unmistakable. The heavens set the rules. This may be why atmospheric violence and celestial fear likely merge so easily in the human imagination. It is tempting from a modern perspective to separate a clear, star-filled sky from a thunderstorm as entirely different experiences. But for early humans, both belong to the same exposed vulnerability. The stars reveal immensity. The moon reveals cycle. Rare celestial events reveal instability. Storms reveal force. Together they create a single sky consciousness, a lived understanding that what happens overhead can alter everything below. This does not require sophisticated theology. It only requires repeated exposure to dependence. If the land feeds you, the sky still governs when that land is visible, traversable, or safe. Storms may also have contributed to one of the oldest human habits, reading signs before disaster. Darkening cloud, sudden stillness, pressure changes, distant flashes beyond a ridge, unusual bird movement, and shifts in wind all become meaningful when danger can arrive fast. In that sense, thunder and lightning train the mind further in pattern detection. Some signs correctly predict what is coming, others do not. But the attempt to read the mood of the sky becomes deeply practical. Here again, fear sharpens intelligence. A group that notices subtle changes before a storm can secure fuel, alter camp position, seek cover, or avoid exposed terrain. Over generations, such attentiveness likely becomes part of shared knowledge, folded into memory, story, caution, and perhaps eventually taboo. Certain places may be avoided in storm season. Certain trees may be recognized as dangerous. Certain ridgelines may acquire reputations. Sky fear becomes landscape behavior. The psychological force of lightning at night is especially difficult to overstate. During the day, a strike is dramatic. At night it is almost unreal. Darkness is the normal condition. Then suddenly every object is carved in stark brilliance, every branch outlined, every face exposed, every shadow hurled outward. The world appears and vanishes in violent flashes, as if reality itself is unstable. For a species whose survival depends on visual continuity and spatial trust, this interruption matters. The land is repeatedly shown and withdrawn. It becomes a place of glimpses rather than sustained seeing. That kind of perception invites memory errors, emotional intensification, and a sense that hidden things are always just beyond certainty. It is the perfect environment for dread. At the same time, storms would sometimes have produced outcomes that later nourished meaning. Lightning-struck trees burn, grasslands smoulder, animals flee fire zones. New growth eventually follows in burned terrain. Rain after drought transforms plant life. Streams refill. Dry air breaks. The same sky that terrifies can also renew. This ambiguity is crucial. Humans rarely form deep symbolic relationships with forces that are only destructive. The powers that matter most are those that destroy and provide, wound and restore, punish and sustain. Thunderstorms fit that pattern exactly. They may ruin a night, threaten a camp, and kill the unwary. Yet they may also bring rain after heat, flush game into new patterns, and alter the land in ways that create future opportunity. Such complexity is fertile ground for reverence mixed with fear. What survives in later mythologies across many parts of the world often gives thunder an elevated status. Gods of the storm, divine weapons of lightning, sky beings associated with noise, rain, and power. It would be careless to project these traditions directly backward into the earliest phases of human thought, because cultures differ and chronology matters. Still, their recurrence hints at something fundamental. Human beings across different environments found thunder hard to leave as mere weather. The sensory intensity is too high, the effects too consequential, the apparent agency too strong. Early humans may not yet have imagined named deities in the later sense, but they likely learned very early that the sky could behave like a force with intention, even if that intention could not be understood. This is also where nighttime social behavior may have deepened. A storm does not merely threaten individuals, it gathers the group into shared exposure. People hear the same thunder, flinch at the same flashes, smell the same rain or ozone, and wait through the same uncertainty. The emotional response becomes collective. Fear circulates. So does reassurance. Someone older may know how to shield embers, how to brace against wind, how to choose safer ground, how to interpret whether the worst is past. In this way, the dangerous sky may have strengthened social dependence as much as it threatened survival. The camp under storm becomes a laboratory of cooperation. It teaches who stays calm, who reads conditions well, who remembers, who protects, who leads. And because these lessons arrive wrapped in sensory terror, they are remembered. So if the stars teach order and rare celestial events shatter it, storms make the lesson immediate. The sky is not only distant pattern or occasional omen, it is an active force with the power to reach down, strike, ignite, flood, and terrify. The old human fear of the night sky therefore grows in two directions at once. One direction is outward, toward the vast, luminous, unreachable heavens. The other is downward, toward the violent weather that collapses that distance and turns the atmosphere into a weapon. Together they form a single inheritance of dread and attention. Early humans do not learn the sky as scenery. They learn it as authority. And on nights when thunder rolls over black land and lightning splits the horizon, that authority feels absolute. Against all of that immensity, all of that violence, all of that recurring uncertainty, the human answer is astonishingly small at first. A ring of stones, a few guarded embers, dry grass, branches, bone, dung, resin, bark. Whatever will hold flame a little longer against wind and damp. A shallow overhang, a woven barrier, hides pulled tight against cold air, bodies arranged close enough to share heat and close enough to wake one another at the wrong sound. The scale is almost absurd. Above them stretches a sky crowded with stars, torn sometimes by fire, sealed sometimes by storm, and ruled by cycles no one controls. On the ground, humans build a circle of light no wider than a few strides. Yet that small circle may be one of the greatest turning points in the history of fear, because it does not remove dread. It contains it. It gives terror edges. Firelight changes more than visibility. It changes the emotional geometry of the night. Without it, darkness is continuous. With it, darkness is broken into zones: what is known, what is partly known, and what remains beyond reach. That division matters profoundly. Humans survive not by abolishing danger, but by organizing their response to it. A campfire does exactly that. It marks a center. It gathers attention. It creates a place where tools can be checked, food handled, wounds examined, children soothed, and elders consulted. It restores faces to one another under the open night sky. That is no small achievement. The heavens still loom. Predators may still circle beyond the light. Storms may still gather unseen. But inside the fire's radius, human beings recover enough control to think together. What survives in the archaeological record makes this more than poetic speculation. Repeated hearth use appears again and again across ancient sites, suggesting that fire is not an occasional convenience, but a deeply structured part of human occupation. Hearths anchor space. They imply return, planning, maintenance, and social arrangement. They also imply that night has become something more than an interval to endure blindly until dawn. Once a group can sustain flame regularly, night becomes partially habitable. Not safe, not comfortable in the modern sense, but usable. The evidence remains incomplete on exactly how emotional life changed around early hearths. Yet, the broader logic is hard to miss. Fire pushes back not only cold and animals, but the total helplessness that darkness would otherwise impose. And once night becomes partially habitable, human attention changes with it. A group gathered tightly around flame is not merely hiding from the dark, it is also watching, listening, remembering, and very likely telling. This may be where the fearful sky begins to produce one of its most enduring human consequences: shared narrative. The stars are visible above the smoke. The moon rises beyond the shelter edge. Thunder can still be heard in the distance. Meteors may cut across the dark at any moment. Yet now there is a social centre from which such events can be observed together. A lone human under the sky feels exposure. A group under the sky, with fire between themselves and the dark, can begin to transform exposure into collective attention. That is a very different state of mind. Shelter deepens this transformation. Even the simplest forms of cover create a psychological revolution. A rock overhang, a cave mouth, a screen of branches, or a hide structure does more than block wind. It redraws the boundary between human space and outer space. There is now an inside and an outside, a threshold between the group and the night. The threshold itself becomes meaningful. Fires are often kept near it. Watchers may sit at it. The sky is still visible beyond it, but no longer as something pressing equally on every side. This narrowing of exposure likely changes how fear is processed. Total vulnerability leaves little room for reflection. Partial shelter introduces the possibility of observing danger from a defended place. And once humans can observe fear instead of only being consumed by it, fear begins to generate thought. This is one reason caves matter so much in the broader human story. Even if not all people live in them, and even if caves are never universally safe, a cave can protect from wind, cold, and some predators, but it can also conceal other dangers and limit escape. Its importance lies not in perfect security but in altered perception. From within a cave mouth, the night sky becomes framed. Framed space is easier for the human mind to handle than limitless space. The stars and moon no longer spread equally across the entire field of vision. They appear through an opening, over a horizon, beyond a threshold. That may sound subtle, but it changes the emotional experience dramatically. The sky becomes something looked at from somewhere, not something merely suffered beneath. In that sense, shelter is one of the first technologies of perspective. Camp life under these conditions likely creates routines that become foundational for later ritual. Someone tends the fire, someone gathers fuel before sunset, someone keeps tools ready, someone watches while others sleep. Children are taught, perhaps wordlessly at first, where to sit, when to stay quiet. What sounds matter, how far not to wander from light. Such repeated behaviors may begin as pure necessity, but repeated necessity often hardens into custom. Custom becomes expectation. Expectation becomes meaning. Scholars still debate how early formal ritual emerges, but no single explanation fully accounts for its roots if the night is left out. The nightly need to secure a center against darkness may have taught humans some of the first lessons in ordered behavior, role distribution, and symbolic boundaries. One lesser known but significant possibility is that firelight itself changes how the sky is imagined. A bright campfire does not erase the stars entirely in a world without larger artificial illumination, but it does create a contrast between the warm, flickering, human-controlled light below and the cold, fixed, or slow-moving lights above. The difference is dramatic. Human fire crackles, consumes fuel, and can die. The stars burn without visible source. Human fire warms the skin. Moonlight does not. Lightning flashes with overwhelming brightness but cannot be kept. These comparisons may have helped early humans sort different kinds of power. Some light belongs to people, but only precariously. Some belongs to the sky, beyond possession. That distinction likely carried enormous emotional weight long before it was ever stated as doctrine. The circle around the fire also encourages a different kind of seeing. In daylight, attention is dispersed across tasks and movement. At night, when work narrows and the body slows, the mind can linger. People can look upward longer. They can compare what they see with what others see. They can recall whether the moon was fuller the previous night, whether a bright star has shifted, whether storms have followed a certain sky color, whether a sudden streak overhead was seen by all or only one person. In this way, campfire life may have amplified rather than diminished sky awareness. Safety, even limited safety, gives the mind enough margin to notice more. Terror becomes observable. Pattern becomes discussable. The heavens move from private fear to shared subject. This is also where social bonding becomes inseparable from cosmic exposure. A group huddled against cold under the night sky does not merely survive together, it experiences significance together. The same flash of lightning startles everyone, the same meteor draws every gaze, the same full moon lights the same faces, the same eclipse, if it occurs, shocks the whole camp at once. Shared astonishment is one of the strongest generators of collective memory. What one person sees alone may be forgotten or doubted. What many witness together acquires authority. Around a fire, such authority can be repeated, shaped, and transmitted. One remembers how the moon looked. Another remembers what happened afterward. Someone older recalls a similar event years before. Out of such exchanges, the earliest frameworks of explanation may begin to harden. And yet firelight does not make humans masters of the night. It constantly reminds them of their limits. Flame must be fed. It can fail in rain. It can be stolen by wind. It can spread and become dangerous itself. Fuel runs out. Sleep comes. Watches are missed. Shelters leak. Predators test the perimeter. The sky remains overhead whether the fire thrives or not. This fragility may be part of why early humans likely developed such deep emotional attachment to maintained flame. It is not only useful, it is the visible proof that human order is still holding. A dying fire is more than inconvenience. It is the shrinking of defended reality. To keep it alive is to insist, however briefly, that the group has not yielded everything to darkness. There is even a case to be made that the earliest sacred feeling may have grown not only from fear of the sky itself, but from the contrast between sky vastness and human enclosure. Sacredness, in one old and very deep sense, often begins where ordinary control ends and concentrated attention begins. A fire at night under a star-filled sky creates exactly that condition. The human circle is intensely present, while the cosmos beyond it is immeasurably distant. One is warm, noisy, mortal, and immediate. The other is cold, silent, repetitive, and immense. To sit between these scales is to feel the strangeness of existence in a form even prehistoric humans could not have missed. They may not have possessed philosophical language for it, but they possessed nerves, memory, mortality, and eyes. So the answer to the terrifying sky is not conquest. It is camp. It is shelter. It is the decision to carve out a center and defend it together. This answer sounds modest because it is modest, but it may have done more than any single insight to change human mental life. A defended nighttime space allows fear to become conversation, attention to become tradition, and repeated exposure to become meaning. Within firelight, the sky is still dangerous, still unknowable, still capable of signs and violence. But it is no longer encountered only as raw exposure. It is encountered from within a human-made world, however temporary. That difference is everything. It is the beginning of the long process by which terror is not erased, but shaped into memory, memory into story, and story into the first durable forms of culture. Once fear has a center to gather around, it begins to change its form. It does not disappear. The stars are still there beyond the smoke. The moon still swells and thins above the shelter edge. Thunder still rolls through darkness, and rare lights still slash across the sky without warning. But now these things are not only endured, they are noticed together, remembered together, and sooner or later, explained together. This is one of the quiet revolutions in the human story. A dangerous world does not simply produce caution. It produces meaning. The mind cannot live for long under repeated patterns and repeated shocks without beginning to connect them. And once those connections are shared within a group, fear starts hardening into story. The first stories do not need to be elaborate. In fact, they are more likely to begin as compressed acts of memory. This light appears before the cold deepens. That moon means brighter travel. Those clouds brought the storm last time. The red moon was followed by fear. A fire crossed the sky before an old hunter died. Whether such associations were accurate, accidental, or only partly true matters less at first than the fact that they become memorable and socially useful. Human beings are pattern-making animals. But more than that, they are pattern-sharing animals. A thing seen by one person becomes far more powerful when repeated by many. Once a group starts repeating a sky event in words, gestures, warnings, or imitations. The event stops being merely visual, it enters culture. That is where meaning in darkness is born. Not from abstract philosophy, but from the pressure of recurring experience. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate exactly when symbolic thought becomes fully human in the modern sense. But what survives in the archaeological and anthropological record suggests a long, gradual deepening of representational ability. Early humans do not wake one day and invent myth all at once. Rather, memory thickens, associations accumulate. Repeated events acquire emotional residue. Shared attention gives certain patterns priority over others. Over time, a sky that was once only a threatening condition becomes populated with remembered significance. Not because the heavens themselves change, but because human minds and human groups do. Fear plays a central role in this process because fear is an engine of memory. Things that threaten survival are stored with unusual intensity. A normal night may blur into the next, but a night of strange light, sudden storm, lunar dimming, or unusual animal behavior becomes hard to forget. If the group survives it, the memory gains weight. If someone dies around that time, the sky event may be folded into grief. If food appears afterward, it may be linked to relief. What one generation remembers vividly, the next may inherit in more structured form. No single explanation fully accounts for how a remembered danger becomes a symbolic system. But the path is easier to imagine when one remembers that the first stories were probably not entertainment. They were ways of organizing uncertainty. This may be why agency enters the sky so naturally in human thought. A moon that disappears and returns, a storm that announces itself with sound, stars that rise in season, meteors that cross like thrown fire, eclipses that interrupt what should not be interrupted. All of these lend themselves to being treated not as passive objects but as actors. Human cognition is strongly biased toward agency detection, especially under conditions of uncertainty. That bias is often useful. Better to mistake wind for a predator than a predator for wind. In the realm of the sky, this same bias may have encouraged early humans to treat celestial change as intention rather than mechanism. Something above does this. Something above withholds light. Something above sends fire. Something above marks time. That does not mean early humans immediately imagine a pantheon of named beings, but it does suggest that the night sky may have become one of the first great theatres in which humans projected force, motive, and hidden will. At the same time, meaning is not always supernatural in the later sense. It can also be mnemonic. Story is one of the strongest memory tools ever developed by humans. A pattern tied to a narrative is easier to remember than a pattern kept as raw data. If a cluster of stars is linked to a familiar animal, a season of movement, or a cautionary event, then the sky becomes easier to carry in the mind. This may be one reason why so many later cultures remember stars through figures, pathways, hunters, birds, fish, or ancestral beings. The content varies enormously, but the cognitive strategy is ancient. Humans translate difficult visual regularities into living forms because living forms are easier to recall. The heavens become understandable not by being simplified into truth, but by being folded into memory through image and narrative. A lesser known but revealing possibility is that repetition under low light may itself encourage imaginative linkage. Firelight is unstable, moonlight distorts, darkness leaves margins uncertain. Under such conditions, the human mind is especially active in completing patterns, assigning form, and inferring continuity from fragments. A few bright stars become a shape. A bright band becomes a river or road. A dim region becomes absence with meaning. This does not mean ancient sky stories were arbitrary. It means they emerged from a visual world where form was always partly found and partly made. The same mental flexibility that helps humans detect prey tracks, read faces in poor light, and infer hidden threats may also help them turn scattered celestial points into narrative structures. In that sense, myth is not the opposite of survival intelligence. It grows out of the same underlying machinery. Around the fire, this machinery becomes social. One person points upward, another nods. A child learns which cluster matters and which strange event is worth remembering. Someone imitates the curve of the moon with a hand. Someone marks time loosely by its changing shape. Someone links a star's return to a coming migration. Someone older warns that when the sky behaves wrongly, caution is needed. These may seem like small interactions, but repeated over generations they form the groundwork of worldview. Meaning rarely enters human life in polished systems. It enters through recurring gestures, phrases, associations, and expectations. The night sky, because it is both stable and surprising, provides ideal material for this accumulation. This may also be where proto-ritual begins to separate from ordinary habit. If certain sky conditions repeatedly coincide with danger or opportunity, the group may start doing certain things in response. Fires are tended more carefully under some conditions. Travel is avoided under others. Watchfulness increases on moonless nights. Children are kept closer during storms. Silence may be observed during an eclipse, or noise made in response. Not because anyone has tested the outcome scientifically, but because action feels necessary when the sky becomes abnormal. Scholars still debate how far back such behaviours can be inferred, and the evidence remains fragmentary, but the logic is strong. Humans do not simply observe meaningful patterns, they answer them, and repeated answers, especially to fear, become ritualized with remarkable ease. What is important here is not whether every early explanation was correct. Most were not, in the modern scientific sense. The important point is that story and ritual make the terrifying sky livable. They do not remove uncertainty, but they give uncertainty a shape. A storm is no longer only random violence if it can be anticipated through signs or answered through practiced behavior. A strange moon is no longer pure horror if it can be recalled as something witnessed before, something endured, something folded into memory with consequence. Story acts as a shelter of another kind. Just as walls and fire contain physical exposure, narrative contains cognitive exposure. It creates a boundary inside the mind. And because narrative is shared, it also creates moral order. Once sky events are remembered collectively, people can be praised for noticing them, blamed for ignoring them, or entrusted with interpreting them. Knowledge becomes unevenly distributed. Some people remember better, some observe more closely, some speak more persuasively, some remain calm under celestial disturbance while others panic. This unevenness matters because it sets the stage for later authority. A terrifying sky does not produce only fear and wonder. It also produces interpreters. Before formal priesthood, before monuments, before written cosmologies. There may already have been individuals within groups whose attentiveness to the heavens gave them influence. But that influence begins here, in the social value of turning fear into intelligible form. There is a deeper transformation still. Once the sky is storied, human beings no longer live only under nature. They live inside a meaningful cosmos. Again, this cosmos need not yet be systematized. It may be local, fluid, contradictory, and incomplete. But the shift is profound nonetheless. The stars are no longer just lights. The moon is no longer just a changing disk. Storms are no longer just noise and danger. They all become elements within a remembered order, however provisional. Humans start inhabiting not only landscapes but explanations. That may be one of the most decisive steps towards civilization, because civilization is not built only from tools, food, and shelter. It is built from shared realities that outlast individuals. So the birth of meaning in darkness is not a decorative chapter added after survival has been solved. It is part of survival itself. The terrifying night sky forces humans to pay attention. Repetition lets that attention accumulate. Fire and shelter give it a social center. Memory preserves what shocks and what recurs. Story binds those memories into transmissible form. Ritual begins as behavior repeated under pressure, slowly, almost invisibly. The heavens are transformed from external conditions into structured significance. This is how fear becomes culture, not all at once, not cleanly, and never perfectly, but enough that when later humans look up and see the sky as alive with beings, warnings, ancestors, pathways, and order, they're building on something very old indeed, the long prehistoric labor of making darkness intelligible. Once the sky has become meaningful, it does not remain confined to the living alone. It begins to gather around the dead. This is one of the most haunting developments in the whole human story, because death and the night sky share certain emotional properties from the beginning. Both confront humans with distance, silence, and irreversibility. Both remove familiar presence from reach. Both resist ordinary explanation. A body that was warm becomes still. A voice that answered does not answer again. A person who occupied the circle of fire is now outside it forever. And above this irreversible absence stretches the same immense sky under which generations have already learned to feel fear, pattern, violence, and recurrence. It is not difficult to see how the two realms might begin to merge. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate exactly how early humans imagined death. But what survives in burial behavior strongly suggests that the dead were not always treated as mere biological remains. They were placed, oriented, accompanied, and remembered in ways that imply thought reaching beyond immediate disposal. That implication matters. Deliberate burial, where it appears, is one of the clearest signs that human beings are doing more than solving a practical problem. Bodies can be left, hidden, covered, or consumed by natural processes. To return to them, to place them carefully, to add pigment, tools, ornaments, or animal parts, to choose a particular position, or to mark a particular place, is to declare that death has meaning. It does not tell us exactly what that meaning was. It does not prove a full afterlife doctrine, and it certainly does not reveal one universal belief, but it suggests that humans had begun treating the dead as still socially significant, and once that happens, the sky is never far away, because the sky is already the great visible elsewhere, the place of disappearance, recurrence, and unreachable distance. Many prehistoric burials also occur in caves, rock shelters, or places with strong spatial boundaries, which complicates the picture in revealing ways. Caves protect and enclose, but they also open toward the outer world. A burial in or near such a place can feel both hidden and connected, sheltered from immediate disturbance yet still positioned within a wider landscape. Some graves appear with red ochre, a substance often associated by researchers with blood, life, transformation. or symbolic marking, though interpretations remain debated. Others include tools, beads, antlers, flowers in disputed cases, or carefully arranged bodies. These details matter because they show that the dead are not always abandoned to anonymity. They are prepared. Preparation suggests relation, and relation, once extended beyond death, invites larger questions. Where has the person gone, if anywhere? What remains? Who or what sees them now? The night sky offers a ready emotional answer even before it offers a doctrinal one. It is where things disappear upward, smoke rises into it, breath vanishes into cold air beneath it, the moon dies and returns within it, stars come and go seasonally, meteors fall through it, darkness closes over the land and then lifts again. For minds already trained to read significance in these recurring celestial changes, death may not feel entirely separate from sky logic. A human life ends. But the world overhead continues its patterns. That contrast can be cruel, but it can also be consoling in a strange way. Something remains, something returns, something watches or outlasts. No single explanation fully accounts for how prehistoric people linked burial and sky awareness. But the symbolic pressure is intense. The dead leave the human circle. The sky is the oldest realm humans know that is beyond ordinary reach. There is also the practical fact of night grieving. Death does not schedule itself neatly for daylight. If someone dies during darkness, the experience is layered immediately with everything the night already means: vulnerability, silence, cold, distant stars, the uncertain edge of firelight. A body lying still under a moonlit sky or beside embers would be unforgettable. The contrast between human stillness and celestial motion may have carved itself deeply into memory. Stars continue to move. The moon continues to climb or sink. Dawn still comes, yet one person does not rise. Such scenes do not need theology to become formative. They are emotionally structured already. Over time, repeated confrontations with loss under the sky may have encouraged a sense that death too belongs to a larger order, even if that order could not be named. Some of the most intriguing clues come from grave orientation. In certain later prehistoric contexts, bodies appear aligned in recurring directions, sometimes linked by researchers to sunrise, sunset, cardinal directions, or significant celestial events. Care is needed here. Alignment can be influenced by terrain, local custom, social distinction, or practical constraints. And scholars still debate how much celestial intention can safely be inferred in many cases. But the broader pattern remains suggestive. Human groups often care which way the dead face. Direction matters, and when direction matters in cultures already attentive to the heavens, the possibility emerges that burial becomes a dialogue between human mortality and celestial order. The grave is no longer only a pit or chamber. It is a placement within a meaningful world. A lesser known but striking detail is that some prehistoric and ancient societies later link the dead not to the distant upper sky in a simple sense, but to thresholds, horizons, westward movement, descending light, caves, mountains, or celestial pathways such as the Milky Way. This diversity is important because it reminds us not to flatten the deep past into one universal sky religion. Humans develop many symbolic solutions to death, yet the recurring role of visible cosmic structure suggests something fundamental. The dead require placement not only in the earth but in thought, and the sky provides one of the oldest and largest frameworks available. It offers direction, recurrence, disappearance, and permanence all at once. Few other features of the natural world can hold those meanings so readily. Burial also intensifies the social value of memory, and memory is one of the bridges between death and the heavens. A dead person is spoken of after they are gone. Their actions, voice, skill, or kinship survive in narrative. Likewise, a striking sky event survives because it is retold. In both cases, what is absent becomes socially present through repeated remembrance. This parallel may have mattered more than we often realize. The same human capacity that preserves the return of stars across seasons preserves the names or identities of the dead across generations. Story keeps both alive. Once that is true, the distance between ancestor and sky narrows. Ancestors may not literally become stars at first, but the conceptual terrain for such an idea is already there. The unreachable lights above and the unreachable dead behind memory belong to neighbouring regions of the mind. The emotional effect of this connection may have been powerful enough to shape behaviour around nighttime mourning, vigils, or repeated visitation of burial places. A grave near a camp, cave, or familiar route is not simply an obstacle in the landscape. It is a point where absence is concentrated. To sit nearby at night, under the same sky once shared with the dead, would fold memory into the heavens almost automatically. The moon that lit the person's face in life now lights the ground above them. The stars under which they travelled now continue without them. Grief under such conditions is not private in the modern sense. It is cosmic in scale, even if expressed through small actions, sitting wakefully, tending a fire, touching objects, facing a direction, recounting events. What survives in the archaeological record cannot capture those moments directly, but the material signs of care suggest that such emotional worlds existed. This may also be where time deepens. Seasonal sky knowledge teaches cyclical return. Death teaches irreversible departure. Holding both truths together is not easy. The moon returns, but a person does not. Stars reappear in their seasons, but the dead remain absent. That tension may have helped drive some of the earliest distinctions between ordinary natural cycles and whatever lies beyond them. It may also have encouraged belief in continued presence in another form, precisely because the natural world offered so many examples of disappearance followed by return. Scholars remain cautious here, rightly so, because inference can outrun evidence quickly. Still, it would be surprising if humans capable of noticing lunar renewal, seasonal reappearance, and cyclical ecological change never use those patterns to think with when faced with death. And once the dead are linked to the sky, even loosely, the heavens gain an added moral and emotional charge. They are no longer only dangerous, useful, or mysterious. They are inhabited by memory. Looking upward no longer means confronting only exposure or pattern. It may also mean recalling those who are gone. This changes the feeling of night in a fundamental way. Fear does not vanish, but it becomes mixed with reverence, longing, and continuity. The sky above the fire is no longer an alien field alone. It is also a place where human loss finds scale. The dead do not fit easily into ordinary landscape, because they are no longer participants in daily movement. The heavens, by contrast, are always present yet always out of reach. That makes them an almost perfect symbolic home for what cannot be held but cannot be forgotten. So burials beneath watching heavens may mark one of the oldest fusions of cosmic awareness and human self-understanding. To bury the dead with care is already to say that human life exceeds immediate use. To bury them within a world where the sky has become meaningful is to place that excess inside a larger order. The grave, the fire, the night, the moon, the stars, the memory of a face, the silence after breathing stops. All of these begin to belong to the same emotional landscape. From that landscape, later ancestor cults, celestial afterlives, funerary orientations, and sacred geographies can eventually grow. But even before all of that, something essential has happened. Early humans have begun to face the oldest fear not only by gathering together in darkness, but by asking whether those who vanish from the circle are truly gone from the world above it. As memory gathers around the sky, human beings begin leaving traces of that memory in matter. Not all of those traces are easy to recognize, and that is part of what makes this stage so compelling. A story spoken beside a fire vanishes into air unless it is repeated. A warning about a star's return survives only in living minds unless it becomes attached to something more durable. At some point, in ways that are still difficult to reconstruct clearly, early humans begin using caves, stone surfaces, portable objects, incised marks, pigments, and spatial arrangement to hold pieces of meaning outside the body. Some of these marks may have nothing to do with the heavens at all. Some may refer to animals, roots, counting, memory aids, rituals, or things now impossible to recover. But among this expanding world of material signs lies a tantalizing possibility that certain objects and images preserve early efforts to remember the sky, to map recurring lights, to mark time, or to anchor celestial fear and fascination in lasting form. This possibility is one of the most debated in prehistoric interpretation. Scholars still debate how far sky reading can be taken in cave art and portable artifacts, and no single explanation fully accounts for every cluster of dots, engraved line, animal association, or repeated arrangement. Caution matters here. It is easy to project modern astronomy backward and declare every mysterious mark a star map. Most are almost certainly not. Yet the opposite mistake is possible too. Once humans have already shown themselves capable of deliberate burial, repeated hearth use, symbolic pigment, long-distance memory, and pattern-based seasonal knowledge, it would be surprising if the sky left no imprint at all in their material world. What survives in the record suggests not certainty, but pressure. The heavens mattered enough that some part of that importance may have been externalized. Caves are especially significant because they are not neutral surfaces. They are deep spaces of altered light, echo, threshold, and enclosure, places where sound behaves strangely and ordinary daylight weakens or disappears. For people already accustomed to confronting the night sky as a realm of danger and meaning, caves may have offered a different but related sensory world darkness with boundaries, mystery under stone instead of overhead, a place where marks endure, animal paintings, hand stencils, abstract signs, dots, ladders, claviforms, branching figures, and engraved lines appear in many cave systems across Upper Paleolithic Europe, though their meanings remain contested. Some researchers have suggested that certain clusters of dots may correlate with star groups or seasonal markers, while others argue they encode breeding cycles, counts, ritual signs, or entirely different symbolic systems. The evidence remains incomplete, yet the question itself is revealing. The sky has become central enough to human life that it is plausible to ask whether it was drawn. One of the most discussed examples is the recurring idea that some Paleolithic cave markings may reflect lunar notation or seasonal counting. Certain notched bones and antler pieces have been interpreted by some scholars as tally systems connected to lunar phases, menstrual cycles, or recurring intervals. Though these interpretations remain highly disputed, The danger lies in overconfidence. A sequence of marks is not self-interpreting. It could refer to many things: animals killed, days travelled, remembered events, simple decorative rhythm, or something entirely lost to us. But the broader possibility remains powerful. Once the moon has been noticed as a recurring visible clock, it becomes one of the most natural candidates for marking. A thing that changes visibly and regularly invites counting. Whether any specific artifact securely proves lunar notation is uncertain. What the artifacts do show is that prehistoric humans increasingly worked with repetition in material form. That alone is a major step. To cut repeated marks into bone, paint repeated dots on stone, or arrange forms in deliberate sequence is to move from memory held only in the mind to memory held in objects. This changes the relationship between humans and the sky in a subtle but profound way. If a celestial pattern can be remembered through a mark, then part of the sky has been brought down into human space. Not physically, of course, but cognitively. It can be revisited in daylight. It can be shown to others. It can be compared across generations. It can survive the death of the original observer. This is one of the quiet foundations of later knowledge systems. Before there are written calendars or formal observatories, there may already be marked things that help people keep faith with recurrence. Portable objects matter here as much as cave walls. A marked baton, bone, plaquette, pebble, or antler can travel. It can move with a group between seasonal camps. It can be handled, taught, pointed to, perhaps even used ceremonially. We cannot always recover how, but portability suggests a practical and social dimension beyond fixed symbolism. A sky pattern remembered on an object would no longer belong to one place only. It could accompany migration, instruction, or ritual repetition. This matters because much of prehistoric life is mobile. Knowledge that survives movement has special value. A group crossing large distances still carries the moon above them, the stars in season, and perhaps some material aid to memory below them. There is also the visual structure of many cave interiors to consider. Deep chambers often create encounters with darkness, flickering light, and selectively illuminated forms that can feel strangely celestial in their own way. Painted animals emerge and recede by torchlight. Dot clusters float on walls. Ceiling surfaces hold shapes above the observer. It is possible, though not provable in many cases, that these environments help translate the emotional experience of the night sky into ritual or mnemonic space. A cave chamber may have acted not as a literal map of the heavens, but as an analogue of cosmic encounter darkness bounded yet full of appearing forms, a place where hidden order can be revealed through controlled light. Scholars still debate such interpretations, and rightly so, but the sensory continuity is difficult to ignore. A lesser-known but intriguing line of research examines whether some repeated animal sign combinations in Ice Age art correspond to seasonal patterns, possibly linked to when certain species mate, migrate, carve, or are hunted. If such readings hold even partially, then the relationship to sky memory may be indirect but important. The stars need not be painted for the heavens to be present. If celestial observation helps track seasonal change, and seasonal change governs animal life, then a marked animal associated with a particular interval may already encode a world where sky and earth are joined. In such a system, the heavens act in the background as the great regulator. While art records the earthly consequences, this would fit well with the broader prehistoric tendency not to isolate celestial knowledge from the rest of life. The sky matters because it helps make the land intelligible. Stone itself may also have become a medium for fixing direction. Even before large monuments, repeated use of certain viewpoints, cave entrances, ridge lines, or horizon markers could preserve observational habits. A place from which the moon rises over a notch in the hills, or certain stars appear above a particular ridge, can acquire significance through repetition alone. No formal architecture is required at first. All that is needed is return, attention, and memory. Over time, people may come to revisit such places because the sky behaves meaningfully there. In this way, the landscape becomes part of the recording system. The land holds the line, the horizon marks the event, and human memory attaches the two. Material culture, then, is not only objects and art. It includes the repeated use of places as memory devices. What makes all of this especially important is that it shows a new stage in the management of fear. Earlier, humans defended themselves against the night with fire and shelter. Then they turned recurring sky experience into story and ritual. Now some of that meaning begins to settle into durable marks and spaces. Fear is no longer only an emotion or a spoken inheritance. It becomes inscribed. The moon's rhythm may become countable. The star's recurrence may become representable. Seasonal expectation may become mappable through signs whose full meaning we can no longer decode. This does not mean the sky has ceased to be terrifying. Quite the opposite. Things are often marked precisely because they matter too much to trust solely to memory. And yet, uncertainty remains at the heart of interpretation. We must be honest about that. Many claims about prehistoric star maps are overstated. Many intriguing artifacts resist any secure conclusion. The temptation to find astronomy everywhere can distort the evidence as badly as the temptation to deny symbolic depth altogether. What survives in the record suggests a human species increasingly capable of storing pattern outside the mind. But it does not hand us a neat manual explaining what every mark meant. That opacity is part of the story. The first sky memory written in stone is still half lost to us. We can see that it mattered. We cannot always see exactly how. Still, even that partial visibility is enough to reveal something remarkable. Early humans were not content merely to live under the heavens. They began, however tentatively, to bring the heavens into durable relation with objects, walls, places, and repeated signs. A dangerous sky became a remembered sky. A remembered sky became a marked sky. And once that happened, human culture crossed another threshold. The cosmos was no longer only outside. It had begun to leave traces inside human worlds of stone, bone, pigment, and place. In those traces, faint and disputed though many are, lies the beginning of a long tradition, the attempt to hold celestial order in human hands, not to possess it fully, but to remember it well enough that fear could become knowledge, and knowledge could outlast the night. Once some people begin to notice the sky more carefully than others, the balance inside the group starts to shift. This is not yet the world of temples, kings, or formal priesthoods, but the logic that will eventually produce those things may already be taking shape. A dangerous sky does not merely inspire fear and story. It rewards attention. The person who remembers when the moon will brighten the night, who notices the return of certain stars before a seasonal movement, who recognizes the signs of an approaching storm, or who remains composed during an eclipse holds something valuable. In a world where uncertainty is costly, pattern recognition becomes a form of power, not because it guarantees safety, but because it improves the odds. And once a skill improves the odds often enough, it begins to alter status. At first, that status may be modest and practical. An elder remembers what followed the last red moon. A skilled observer knows when to move camp before weather shifts. A calm voice during thunder keeps the group organized rather than scattered. Someone who can associate a star's appearance with fish runs, migrations, or cold nights becomes useful in ways that are hard to ignore. This kind of authority is not abstract. It is earned under pressure. It emerges from repeated success, or at least from the appearance of success, which in human societies can matter almost as much. Scholars still debate how early specialized ritual or interpretive roles arose in prehistoric groups, and the evidence remains incomplete, but no single explanation fully accounts for later religious authority unless one includes this older foundation. Some people become important because they seem better at reading what others fear. That distinction matters. Humans rarely grant enduring influence only to the strongest. Strength matters, certainly. So do hunting skill, kinship, age, and experience. But where the environment is uncertain and the sky visibly governs light, season, storm, and omen-like disruption, interpretive authority can become deeply significant. The person who knows when darkness will be less severe, when certain stars signal ecological change, or how to respond behaviorally when the heavens become abnormal, begins to occupy a special place. Even if their knowledge remains practical and incomplete, it can still feel extraordinary to others. That is often how sacred status begins, not from pure invention, but from real attentiveness wrapped in emotional intensity. The transition from useful knowledge to ritual prestige is easy to imagine if a group repeatedly survives conditions that one particular person seems to anticipate well. That person's advice may acquire weight beyond the specific events themselves. They are consulted more often, their caution is remembered, their presence during crisis becomes reassuring. Their interpretations of unusual celestial phenomena may start to shape group behavior when the moon darkens unexpectedly. Perhaps they tell others to remain close, feed the fire, avoid travel, maintain silence, or perform some repeated action. Whether the action has any effect on the sky is irrelevant in physical terms. Socially, it matters enormously. It organizes fear, and the one who organizes fear becomes central. This is where taboo may begin to grow around the heavens. Once certain sky events are linked to danger, and once certain individuals are trusted to interpret them, not everyone needs equal freedom to speak or act. Some nights may be treated differently. Some behavior may be restricted under moonless darkness, storm conditions, or unusual celestial appearances. Children may be warned not to point, not to wander, not to speak lightly of what is overhead. Pregnant women, hunters, mourners, or the recently initiated might be subject to special rules depending on the group's customs, though the details are impossible to reconstruct clearly for deep prehistory. Still, what survives in later small-scale societies across the world suggests a recurring pattern. Environmental uncertainty often becomes socially managed through taboo. The sky, because it is both unpredictable and socially important, is ideal ground for this process. A lesser-known but crucial point is that ritual authority does not require fraud. Modern people often imagine interpreters of the sky as either scientists before science or manipulators exploiting fear. The deeper human reality is usually more mixed. A person can genuinely believe in the significance of a sky event while also gaining prestige from interpreting it. They can possess real observational skill and still surround it with symbolic language or repeated performance. In fact, this mixture is likely common. Someone who has spent years watching horizons, stars, cloud signs, lunar phases, and seasonal correlations may sincerely feel that the heavens communicate meaning. that feeling would not be irrational in context. The sky really does shape life. It really does warn, conceal, reveal, and disrupt. The move from practical observer to sacred intermediary may therefore be gradual, almost invisible. Firelit gatherings would have amplified this transformation, around the hearth or shelter edge, under a sky that still frightens the group. The person who speaks with confidence carries disproportionate emotional force. Tone matters, timing matters, memory matters. If they can connect a strange event to a prior event, or calm fear by placing it within known pattern, they become more than a witness. They become a keeper of continuity. This may be one of the earlier social uses of cosmology, not to explain the universe for its own sake, but to keep the human group coherent under conditions that threaten panic. Ritualized interpretation is, in this sense, a survival technology. Once it exists, even in rudimentary form, it can spread into other parts of life. A person trusted with the sky may also advise on movement, burial, seasonal timing, or the proper response to sickness and bad fortune, especially if such events are thought to coincide with celestial irregularity. Here the sky's power radiates outward. It becomes a source of legitimacy, a burial oriented in a certain way, a gathering held under a certain moon, a migration beginning after a certain star rise, a prohibition observed during eclipse or storm season. All of these actions reinforce the standing of those who claim or inherit sky knowledge. Over time, such knowledge may become less individual and more institutional, passing through lineages, age groups, ritual specialists, or traditions of initiation. We cannot trace that process cleanly in the earliest periods, but the social logic is difficult to miss. There is also a subtler consequence. Once some individuals are recognized as especially competent in relation to the heavens, the sky itself becomes less democratically interpreted. Not everyone's fear carries equal authority. Not everyone's memory counts the same. This concentration of interpretive power may be one of the earliest forms of asymmetry in symbolic life. Material inequality may still be limited in many foraging societies, but symbolic inequality can arise under very different conditions. One person knows the stories better, one person knows the signs. One person is trusted to say whether a strange sky event is warning, renewal, anger, corruption, or transition. That trust is social capital, and social capital can be as powerful as stored wealth in shaping a community. Scholars still debate how much hierarchy existed in many prehistoric groups, and rightly so. Many were likely flexible, situational, and far less stratified than later agricultural societies. Yet even fluid groups can produce concentrated prestige, especially around dangerous and uncertain domains. Weather, death, illness, hunting luck, and the heavens all encourage deference to those who appear especially skilled. This does not mean that sky observers instantly become rulers, but it does suggest that fear of the night sky may have helped create one of the oldest recurring social types in human history, the person who mediates between ordinary people and the larger powers that seem to govern life. The emotional force of celestial disruption would make this mediation especially potent. During ordinary nights, anyone can see the moon and stars. During extraordinary nights, people want explanation. A total lunar eclipse, an unexpected comet, repeated meteors, violent storm sequences, or strange glows in the heavens would all place enormous pressure on a group's symbolic resources. Someone must say what this means, what should be done, and how the group should endure it. Even if their answer is tentative, the very act of answering matters. Silence leaves fear unstructured. Interpretation gives it a path. The one who provides that path becomes memorable. And from there, ritual itself can harden. Certain actions repeated during celestial events begin to feel necessary because they have been done before. Fires are fed in a certain way. Bodies are arranged a certain way. Songs, gestures, abstentions, offerings, silences, or watch practices become customary. What began as improvised response becomes inherited form. Inherited form, especially when tied to sky knowledge, creates tradition. Tradition creates continuity across generations. Continuity creates authority for those who preserve it, slowly, without any single dramatic invention. Fear of the heavens begins to help organize human society from within. This may be one of the most consequential transformations in the entire story. The terrifying sky does not only produce private awe or communal myth, it also begins to sort humans among themselves. Some are watchers, some are rememberers, some are interpreters, some are novices, some inherit caution, others inherit responsibility. In later civilizations, these distinctions will expand into priesthoods, astronomer scribes, ritual calendars, and monumental architecture aligned to celestial events. But the deeper root lies earlier, in much smaller settings, where a group sits under a dangerous sky and looks toward the person who seems to understand it best. So fear becomes authority not because the sky is mastered, but because mastery appears possible in fragments. No one controls the moon, the stars, the storm, or the eclipse, but someone can notice more, remember better, and shape response more effectively. That is enough. Under the pressure of darkness and uncertainty, even partial orientation feels profound. And once human groups begin granting prestige to those who can turn celestial dread into social order, the night sky has done something remarkable. It has not only frightened humanity into attention, it has helped create the first sacred specialists, those whose power comes from standing, however imperfectly, between the vulnerable campfire below and the immense changeable heavens above. At some point, slowly enough that no one living through it could have recognized the scale of the change, the terrifying sky begins to lose a little of its raw unpredictability. Not because the heavens become gentler, and not because rare violence disappears, but because repeated observation starts turning certain fears into expectations. This is one of the great pivots in the human relationship with the night. A moon that once seemed to vanish mysteriously can now be anticipated in its return. A star that rises before dawn at the edge of a certain season becomes less an omen than a marker. The long sweep of the year, once felt only through cold, hunger, ripening, migration, and weather, starts to become visible in advance through celestial repetition. Fear is still there, but it is no longer blind. It has begun to count. That counting may not begin with numbers in the later formal sense. It may begin with intervals felt in the body and remembered in objects, phrases, gestures, or communal habit, nights between one moon and the next, days between a certain star's first appearance and the arrival of cold, the gradual swelling of light after the dark moon, the remembered recurrence of a bright cluster before animals move across a route known to generations. What survives in the record suggests that humans become increasingly skilled at linking repeated natural cycles together, even if the evidence rarely lets us see the full intellectual structure directly. No single explanation fully accounts for how or where this transformation began first, because it likely emerged many times in many places. Yet the underlying logic is clear. A sky that repeats becomes measurable in the broadest human sense, not fully mastered, but tracked. This matters because tracking changes the emotional meaning of the future. A group that can anticipate seasonal turning points even roughly is different from a group that can only react once conditions are already present. Anticipation allows preparation. Preparation allows storage, travel planning, ritual timing, coordination, and teaching. The heavens, once feared as the visible sign of uncontrollable darkness, begin to offer one of the earliest forms of temporal structure available to human communities. The sky becomes a calendar before calendars exist, not a perfect one, not a universal one, and not always a written one, but a working one. The moon gives an obvious sequence. The stars give broader seasonal anchoring. The horizon gives repeatable points of appearance and disappearance. Together they turn the night into a framework for reckoning. The moon is probably the first major teacher here, because its cycle is visible, embodied, and hard to ignore. Its phases provide the kind of recurring sequence that even small children can learn through repeated exposure. A group need not calculate the synodic month precisely to recognize that the moon moves through a familiar order, and that this order can be used to organize expectation. Nights of fuller light are different from nights of deeper darkness. Travel, watchfulness, gathering, fishing, mourning, storytelling, and ritual might all gradually become associated with different lunar conditions. The moon cycle is not only an external clock, it is a shared rhythm around which communal behavior can gather. Scholars still debate how early such structuring became explicit, but the possibility is strong precisely because the moon is so publicly and repeatedly visible. Stars, however, extend this reckoning beyond the month and into the year. Their seasonal return offers something more subtle and perhaps more powerful, the ability to locate the present within a larger cycle before that cycle fully unfolds on the ground. This is an extraordinary cognitive achievement, even when practiced without writing. A particular star or cluster appearing on the dawn horizon may tell experienced observers that a dry period is ending, that fish runs are near, that migrations are beginning, or that colder winds will soon matter. Such observations need not be exact in the modern astronomical sense to become socially transformative. What matters is reliability good enough to shape behavior. Once the sky can help answer not only where we are, but when we are, the human relationship to uncertainty begins to change at a deep level. A lesser known but important point is that early calendrical thinking may have emerged less from abstract curiosity than from the pressures of coordination. A single skilled observer can benefit privately from noticing a sky pattern, but a group benefits most when that pattern is made shareable. People must know when to move, when to gather, when to meet, when to expect scarcity, when to avoid exposure, when to prepare fuel, when to watch coastlines, when to track herds, when births among prey animals are likely, when rivers swell, when birds return. These are not philosophical questions, they're collective ones, and collective timing is one of the basic ingredients of more complex society. The sky helps create it because it offers visible regularities beyond the lifespan of any one event on the ground. This is also where the difference between omen and calendar becomes especially revealing. An omen is an event interpreted as meaningful, often singular, disruptive, and emotionally charged. A calendar is a pattern recognized as repeatable enough to structure ordinary life. The same sky can produce both. An eclipse remains a rupture. A comet remains a stranger. A meteor still startles. But the moon's phases, the stars' seasonal rhythm, and the broad architecture of dawn and dusk slowly move into another category. They become dependable enough not merely to fear or revere, but to use. This does not eliminate sacred meaning. In fact, in many later societies the calendar is deeply sacred, but it changes the balance. Humans are no longer only reading divine or dangerous signs, they are organizing time itself. The implications are enormous. Once time is organized beyond immediate memory, human planning can thicken, seasonal abundance can be anticipated, ritual gatherings can be synchronized, burials may be timed to celestial conditions, journeys can begin under chosen phases of light, social obligations can cluster around recurring intervals. Even in small-scale communities, this kind of temporal structuring can increase cohesion and reduce some forms of uncertainty. The evidence remains incomplete for exactly when this threshold is crossed in different parts of the world, but what survives in later prehistoric monuments, repeated site use, and ethnographic parallels suggest that celestial timing eventually becomes central to community life in many regions. Before monuments align to solstices, minds align to recurrence. There is another, subtler transformation here. Counting the sky changes how humans experience waiting. In a purely reactive world, waiting is often just endurance. In a reckoned world, waiting becomes anticipation of a known return. The dark moon will give way to light again. The star missing from the horizon now will rise in its season. The cold indicated by a certain sky pattern can be prepared for. That psychological shift is profound. It does not make life easy, but it places fear inside a temporal framework. The future is no longer only threat, it is sequence, and sequence is the beginning of historical consciousness in a very deep sense. A group that lives by recurrence is already thinking beyond the moment. This may also help explain why sky knowledge becomes so resistant to loss once established. A useful calendar is not just information, it is woven into movement, food, birth, death, ritual, and memory. Children learn it because adults act through it. Elders preserve it because communities depend on it. Specialists refine it because their prestige is tied to its successful use. Over generations, celestial reckoning becomes one of the hidden infrastructures of culture. It does not always appear in spectacular form at first. It may remain embedded in custom, story, orientation, song, taboo, or repeated advice. But its effects are cumulative. The more communities rely on predictable celestial rhythm, the more those rhythms structure the possibility of larger and more stable forms of social life. At the same time, the sky never becomes fully tame. This is important. A calendar drawn from the heavens is always built beneath a ceiling still capable of disruption. Ordinary recurrence can be measured, but extraordinary events still wound confidence. That tension may be one reason sky-based timekeeping becomes so culturally charged. It sits between trust and fear. The moon can be counted, yet it can still darken in eclipse. Stars can guide seasons, yet a comet can intrude without warning. The sky teaches order, but never perfect reassurance. Perhaps that is why human beings so often surround calendars with ritual. Time measured from the heavens still feels like time borrowed from powers beyond human control. One of the most remarkable consequences of all this is that the human group becomes less trapped in the present than any animal community before it. Other creatures respond exquisitely to cycles, but humans begin to externalize and communicate cyclical structure consciously. They remember the return before it arrives. They act in anticipation. They coordinate around intervals that outlast the immediate sensation of weather or hunger. This is not civilization yet, but it is one of its preconditions. Agriculture, monument building, long-distance exchange, ritual assemblies, and complex social obligations all become easier in worlds where time can be reckoned communally. The night sky, once feared as the great uncertainty overhead, helps make that reckoning possible. So the transformation from omen to calendar is not a minor technical improvement. It is a deep reorganization of human life. The heavens cease to be only the realm of danger, wonder, and occasional terror. They become part of the machinery by which humans plan, gather, move, and remember together. Fear is not erased in this process. It is disciplined. It is turned into vigilance, vigilance into observation, observation into sequence, and sequence into social time. Somewhere in that long transition, under countless nights of patient watching, the human species makes one of its most consequential discoveries that the sky not only threatens from above, it repeats, and because it repeats, life below can begin to take shape around something larger, older, and more regular than any single human life. Once the sky becomes reliable enough to reckon with, people do more than watch it. They begin returning to places where it can be watched well. This is the beginning of sacred landscape in one of its oldest forms. Before great stone circles, before formal observatories, before written priesthoods and royal calendars, there is a simpler but deeply important habit, choosing ground not only for shelter, water, and defense, but also for what can be seen from it. A ridge with a clean horizon, a cave mouth facing a certain direction, a valley opening where the moon rises between two dark slopes, a shoreline where dawn stars appear over the sea with unusual clarity, a plateau where the sky seems enormous and unobstructed. Such places would not have mattered only because they were beautiful. They mattered because repeated celestial events became easier to recognize there, and repeated recognition turns location into memory. The land begins to hold the sky. This process may have been gradual enough to leave only faint traces at first. A group returns seasonally to the same overhang or camp because water, animals, or roots make it useful. Over time, they also noticed that the first appearance of a certain star can be seen clearly above a notch in the horizon from that place, or that the full moon climbs over a certain ridge line, or that the longest and shortest days alter the path of dawn and dusk in recognizable ways. What begins as practical familiarity can slowly deepen into something else. The place is no longer only where the group camps, it is where the sky behaves meaningfully. Scholars still debate how early intentional celestial alignment can be securely identified, and the evidence remains incomplete, but no single explanation fully accounts for later sacred landscapes unless earlier habits of meaningful viewing already exist. This is one of the most important transitions in the whole story. Earlier, meaning lives in memory, story, ritual response, and marked objects. Now the land itself becomes part of the system. A horizon line can function like an instrument long before anyone would think of it in those terms. A mountain shoulder, tree gap, cliff edge, or cave entrance becomes a reference point against which celestial movement is noticed. Unlike a portable tally object, such a marker does not travel. Instead, people travel to it. That reversal matters. It creates pilgrimage in the deepest sense, even if no formal pilgrimage yet exists. A certain place becomes important because it helps humans situate themselves within larger time. The emotional effect of this should not be underestimated. To stand in a location where the moon or stars return in expected relation to the land is to feel order embodied. The heavens are still far beyond reach, but for a moment they seem to meet the earth at a known edge, a rising point on the horizon, repeated year after year, allows celestial pattern to touch geography. That union can be powerful enough to transform ordinary terrain into charged terrain. The ridge is no longer only a ridge. The cave mouth is no longer only shelter. The clearing is no longer only open ground. Each becomes a place where time reveals itself, and a place where time reveals itself very easily becomes a place where people gather with heightened attention. Gathering changes everything. Once multiple people witness celestial recurrence from the same place across years, the sight accumulates significance faster than any single observer could provide alone. The old teach the young where to stand, what to look for, how to know when the season is turning. Stories are attached to landmarks. Burials may cluster nearby. Fires are lit there at certain times. Offerings, gestures, silence, feasting, mourning, or initiation may begin to concentrate around those moments. We must be careful not to overstate what the earliest evidence can prove, but the underlying logic is strong. Repeated shared observation tends to ritualize itself. When the object of observation is the sky, and the stakes involve food, movement, danger, and memory, the ritual pull becomes even stronger. A lesser known but revealing point is that sacred landscape does not require architecture at first. Modern people often think of ancient sky watching through monuments because monuments survive so dramatically. But long before stones are erected or earthworks are lined, a landscape can already be sacred through use, a path worn by repeated approach, a favoured ridge, a cave with certain seasonal visibility, a shoreline camp returned to under a known moon. All of these can function as ceremonial or mnemonic sites without leaving monumental evidence. This matters because it reminds us that celestial religion, if we can call it that, likely began in movement and attention rather than construction. The first sanctuary may simply have been a place where the horizon and memory met. Still, over long stretches of time, repeated return can prepare the way for more permanent marking. Once a place matters repeatedly, humans often feel the need to formalize that importance. A stone is set upright, a line is cleared, a post is placed, a grave is oriented, a pathway is maintained. These acts do not necessarily begin as grand architecture. They begin as small stabilizations of meaning, ways of ensuring that the right place can be found again, the right line of sight preserved, the right communal memory anchored in the land. The evidence remains incomplete for many early cases, but later prehistoric monuments across different regions show that this process eventually becomes unmistakable. Humans start shaping the ground in response to the sky. The sacred quality of these places likely comes not only from celestial utility, but from the layering of human events there. Births, deaths, gatherings, successful hunts, bad seasons, initiations, reunions, and periods of waiting may all become attached to the same locations where meaningful skywatching occurs. In this way, landscape gathers both cosmic and social memory. A hilltop is important not just because a star rises there, but because ancestors stood there, because a burial lies nearby, because a feast occurred after a hard winter, because the group once saw the moon darken from that point and survived. The land becomes storied in two directions, at once upward toward the heavens and backward toward human memory. This double layering is one of the hallmarks of sacred place across much of human history. There is also a political implication beginning to emerge here. If certain places are better for celestial observation, and if sky knowledge carries authority, then access to those places may matter, not necessarily in the rigid, exclusionary way of later stratified societies, but enough that gatherings can be organized, leadership displayed, and interpretive roles reinforced. A person or lineage associated with the right place at the right time can consolidate prestige. To announce the turning season from a known horizon point, to lead others there, to preside over rites linked to celestial recurrence. All of this strengthens the bond between sky knowledge and social structure. The sacred landscape becomes a stage on which authority is enacted. Scholars still debate exactly how intentional various alignments are in early prehistoric sites, and caution remains necessary. Some apparent orientations may be accidental or exaggerated by later interpretation. A monument or grave facing east does not automatically prove solar worship. A repeated sightline does not always mean calendar use, but caution should not blind us to the larger pattern. Human beings who already fear the heavens, read them for survival, mark them in memory, and attach them to burial and ritual are very likely to care about where they stand in relation to them. Once that much is granted, sacred landscape becomes less a speculative leap than a natural extension of everything that came before. The night sky, in other words, begins to organize space as well as time. Earlier it taught humans how to endure darkness, then how to read recurrence, then how to remember through story and marks. Now it helps define where important things happen. This is a profound development because civilization depends not only on shared time, but on shared places. Communities need centers. They need gathering points, memory points, thresholds, and sites where collective identity becomes tangible. A landscape tied to celestial recurrence offers all of these at once. It is stable enough to return to, open enough to reveal the sky, and meaningful enough to hold ceremony. And yet the original fear never completely disappears. That may be why these places feel sacred rather than merely technical. If the sky were only a neutral clock, perhaps no reverence would attach to it. But the heavens remain immense, unsettling, sometimes violent, and never wholly predictable. Even at a favoured observing place, an eclipse can still shock, a storm can still erase the stars, a comet can still arrive as a stranger. Sacred landscapes emerge not because humans have solved the sky, but because they keep meeting it at the boundary where knowledge and vulnerability overlap. The chosen place offers orientation, but it also stages mystery. So the first sacred landscapes may have begun as simple acts of return. Return to the hill where the season declares itself. Return to the cave whose opening frames a known moonrise. Return to the shoreline where dawn stars and fish cycles coincide. Return to the clearing where the dead were buried under familiar heavens. Over generations, return becomes tradition. Tradition becomes sanctity, and sanctity begins to shape the land itself. In that process, the old fear of the night sky leaves one of its most enduring marks on human history. It teaches people not only to look up together, but to gather somewhere together while doing it, and from that shared somewhere, the road toward monument, temple, calendar rite, and sacred center is already visible, even if no one standing there yet knows how far it will lead. Even after all of these transformations, after fear has become story, story has become memory, memory has become authority, and authority has begun attaching itself to place and time, one problem remains. Why did the sky grip early humans so powerfully in the first place? Was it mainly danger? Was it pattern? Was it the needs of survival? Was it something deeper in the architecture of the human mind? Scholars still debate these questions, and they do so because the answer almost certainly refuses to stay inside a single explanation. The night sky is too large a phenomenon, and human life too complicated, for one cause to account for everything. What we can do is weigh the main lines of thought, and see how each illuminates part of the story. One of the strongest explanations begins with predator vigilance and nocturnal vulnerability. In this view, fear of the night sky is not initially fear of stars or celestial bodies at all. It is fear of darkness as a condition of exposure. Humans are poorly equipped for night compared with many predators. We see badly in low light, move noisily, and depend heavily on cooperation and visual information. Darkness reduces those advantages. If the sky matters under such conditions, it matters because it controls light, visibility, and the terms of danger. Moon phases alter risk. Cloud cover deepens uncertainty. Starlight, storms, and atmospheric conditions change how the land can be read. This explanation is compelling because it begins with survival pressures we know are real. It requires no advanced symbolism, no sudden leap into abstract religion. Fear starts on the ground. The strength of this account is its realism. It reminds us that early humans do not need mythology in order to be frightened by the heavens. They need only to depend on daylight and suffer under its absence. The sky becomes emotionally charged because it governs the quality of darkness itself. But this explanation also has limits. It can tell us why night is dangerous, yet it does not fully explain why the heavens become so richly storied, so morally alive, or so entangled with death, ritual, and long memory. Many animals fear the dark. Humans do something more. They transform darkness into shared symbolic order. Predator vigilance may be the root, but it does not account for the whole tree. A second major explanation emphasizes cognitive pattern seeking. Human beings are unusually prone to detect regularity, infer causation, and search for significance in repeating structures. The night sky is one of the largest and most stable patterned systems available to naked eye observers. Lunar phases recur, stars rise and set predictably, seasonal changes alter what is visible overhead. Rare disruptions stand out against that background. From this perspective, the heavens become powerful because they are exactly the kind of environment the human brain is built to work on, structured enough to reward attention, mysterious enough to resist full understanding, and consequential enough to matter. This explanation helps clarify why fear so easily turns into memory, story, and eventually reckoning. Humans do not simply endure the sky. They read it because reading pattern is one of their deepest instincts. This account is especially persuasive when paired with the needs of hunting, gathering, migration, and seasonal planning. Pattern recognition is not a luxury in such worlds. It is a survival strategy. To notice that certain stars return with ecological shifts, or that moonlight changes the behavior of humans and animals, is genuinely useful. Yet here too there are limits. Pattern seeking can explain why celestial recurrence becomes meaningful, but not entirely why it becomes sacred. It helps us understand calendars and orientation, but perhaps less fully the emotional weight of eclipses, burials, taboo, and cosmic agency. It tells us why the sky becomes informative. It does not by itself explain why it becomes inhabited by intention in the human mind. That leads to a third line of explanation, one centered on ritual psychology and agency detection. Human beings, especially under uncertainty, are biased toward treating ambiguous events as caused by agents rather than impersonal mechanisms. This tendency is often adaptive. Missing a real actor can be dangerous. In the sky, that same bias may have encouraged early people to perceive will, mood, or communication in celestial change. A storm feels like action. An eclipse feels like interference. A comet appears like an arrival. Thunder sounds like declaration. Once such events are treated as expressions of agency, ritual becomes a natural response. People do not negotiate with mechanisms. They negotiate, appease, imitate, answer, or submit to powers. In this view, sacred sky behavior emerges because the human mind finds intention easier to handle than indifference. This framework is useful because it explains why the heavens become morally charged rather than merely observed. It helps make sense of the rise of taboo, interpreters, and repeated ceremonial responses to extraordinary events. But it too can be overstated. Humans do not project agency onto everything equally. The sky becomes a privileged field for such projection because it already matters materially and emotionally. A meteor alone does not create religion if no one cares about the heavens otherwise. Agency detection works best as part of a larger account, not as the whole answer. It describes one mental mechanism, not the full historical process. A fourth explanation focuses on environmental stress and instability. In this reading, the sky matters most during periods when climate fluctuation, migration pressure, food uncertainty, or landscape change force communities to become intensely attentive to recurring signs. Ice age oscillations, drought cycles, shifting coastlines, seasonal scarcity, and ecological unpredictability would all increase the value of anything that helps anticipate change. Under such conditions, celestial observation may intensify because the stakes are higher. The heavens become not just awe-inspiring, but urgent. This theory has considerable force because deep prehistory is full of environmental stress. Human groups live through climatic shifts dramatic enough to reshape routes, prey distributions, vegetation, and coastlines. A sky that offers even rough temporal guidance would become invaluable. Still, environmental stress alone cannot explain why celestial fear remains so emotionally dense long after specific crises pass. Hard conditions sharpen observation, yes, but they do not automatically produce reverence, ancestral connection, or sacred landscape. Many stressful environments leave little room for elaborate cosmology unless other cognitive and social conditions are present. So again, the explanation is strongest when paired with others. Environmental instability may intensify the need to read the sky, while pattern-seeking, memory, and ritual psychology determine how that reading takes cultural form. Some scholars place greater emphasis on social cohesion. In this view, the night sky becomes powerful partly because it offers groups a shared external object around which attention, teaching, and coordinated behavior can gather. Everyone sees the same moon. Everyone witnesses the same eclipse if present. Everyone depends on the same changing seasons. Shared sky observation encourages shared narrative, and shared narrative strengthens group identity. Rituals tied to celestial cycles reinforce social bonds, establish roles, and create recurring communal moments that outlast individuals. This explanation is particularly strong when considering the campfire setting, the rise of interpreters, and the eventual development of sacred places. The sky becomes socially important because it allows humans to synchronize meaning. This social account is persuasive, but it too depends on prior emotional charge. People do not organize collective attention around something wholly irrelevant to survival or imagination. The sky works as a social anchor because it is already dangerous, useful, patterned, and strange. Group cohesion helps explain why sky meanings endure and spread. It does not fully explain their original intensity. Then there is the existential explanation, harder to test but difficult to dismiss. Human beings are perhaps the first creatures able not only to see the night sky, but to feel in it a mirror of their own condition, smallness, mortality, recurrence. and mystery. The stars outlast generations. The moon dies and returns. The dead do not return in the same way. The heavens stretch beyond all paths and all remembered boundaries. In this view, fear of the night sky is not merely practical or cognitive, it is existential. Humans look upward and sense, however dimly at first, that they live inside something vast, ordered in part, indifferent in part, and larger than any life. This explanation is difficult to prove archaeologically, but the emotional force of later human responses to the cosmos suggests it may preserve something very old indeed. The danger here is romantic overreach. We must avoid imagining Paleolithic humans as modern philosophers in animal skins, contemplating metaphysics in the exact way later literate cultures do. The evidence remains incomplete, and humility is necessary. Yet rejecting all existential depth would be its own kind of error. Humans capable of grief, burial, long memory, and symbolic marking are capable of more than practical fear. They are capable of encountering the night sky as a fact about existence itself, even if they do not phrase it in abstract language. What survives in the record suggests minds already rich enough to hold ambiguity, pattern, loss, and wonder together. So which explanation is right? Most likely, several are right at once. Predator vulnerability explains the emotional root. Pattern seeking explains attention. Environmental pressure explains urgency. Agency detection explains ritual response. Social cohesion explains transmission. Existential awareness explains the lasting depth. Remove any one factor and the story becomes thinner. Keep them together and the prehistoric sky begins to look like what it probably was not a single cause of fear, but a meeting place of many human tendencies operating under conditions of real danger and repeated exposure. That may be the deepest lesson in the debate. Early humans did not fear the night sky for one reason, any more than they created culture for one reason. The heavens became formative because they touched too many parts of life at once. They controlled light. They hinted at time. They disrupted expectation. They framed death. They rewarded memory. They intensified group feeling. They invited explanation. They resisted mastery. No single explanation fully accounts for this because the sky did not enter human life through a single door. It entered through every opening at once, and that is precisely why its power lasted. By the time human communities begin building more stable worlds, the oldest fear has already changed the species. Not all at once, and not in the same way everywhere, but deeply enough that its traces run through nearly every later form of civilization. The night sky begins as exposure, as the visible face of darkness under which the human body is weak, cold, uncertain, and hunted. Then it becomes pattern. The moon teaches recurrence, the stars teach season, storms teach force, eclipses, meteors, comets, and strange lights teach that even apparent order can be broken. Fire and shelter teach humans to gather against that uncertainty. Story teaches them to remember it. Burial teaches them to connect it with loss. Marks on bone, stone, and cave wall begin to carry fragments of it forward. Interpreters rise. Places become sacred because they frame its return. Counting emerges. Time itself is pulled partly out of the heavens. By the time we reach the threshold of agriculture, monument building, and formal religion, much of the emotional and cognitive groundwork has already been laid under far older skies. This is why the fear of the night sky matters so much. It is not a side note in prehistory. It may be one of the pressures that helped force humanity into larger forms of attention than any other animal had to sustain. Fear sharpened memory. Memory sharpened pattern recognition. Pattern recognition encouraged planning. Planning required communication. Communication stabilized story. Story supported ritual. Ritual supported authority. Authority attached itself to places and seasons. Out of this long chain came some of the basic structures of organized life. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every step in the sequence. But taken together, the pattern is hard to ignore. The heavens did not create civilization alone, yet they may have helped teach humans how to live beyond the immediate moment, and that is one of civilization's deepest foundations. Consider what it means for a community to share time, not merely to share daylight and darkness as all animals do, but to share anticipated return, to know that a season is approaching because the sky says so, to gather under a chosen moon, to bury with orientation, to travel by stars, to tell children that when certain lights appear, the world below will change. These are not just techniques, they are forms of collective abstraction. They allow people to coordinate action across intervals longer than hunger, weather, or individual mood. A group that can do that begins to thicken into something more enduring than a loose cluster of surviving bodies. It becomes a society with memory extending ahead of itself. And with that extension comes the first real expansion of human power over uncertainty. Not total power, never that. The sky remains too large, too unstable at times, too indifferent, but enough predictability is extracted from it to alter how people inhabit the earth. Food can be sought in expectation, not only desperation. Movement can be timed, gatherings can recur, ritual can align with celestial return rather than pure chance. The dead can be placed within an order that seems larger than the grave. Even where understanding remains symbolic rather than scientific, the practical result is enormous. Life becomes more schedulable. The group can begin to lean slightly into the future instead of constantly bracing against it. This may be why later civilizations so often place the heavens at the center of legitimacy. Kings rule by celestial signs, temples face solar events, calendars govern taxation, planting, feast days, and mourning. Priests watch the skies, cities align to cosmic directions. None of that appears from nowhere. It grows from a much older human inheritance in which the sky had already proved itself too important to ignore and too powerful to leave uninterpreted. Agricultural societies intensify and formalize what foraging societies had already begun. They build permanent structures around patterns long known in more fragile settings. They turn the old campfire knowledge into institutions. They turn recurring fear into official time. There is something almost paradoxical in this legacy. The thing that first made humans feel smallest may have helped make human ambition largest. To look upward into immensity and find yourself vulnerable is one kind of lesson. To keep looking upward until recurrence appears is another. That second lesson does not erase humility, but it creates method. It teaches that not everything beyond control is beyond study. This is one of the longest continuities in human thought. From Paleolithic observers tracking moonlight, to Neolithic builders marking solstices, to ancient astronomer priests, to later mathematicians and telescope makers, the path begins with the same strange mixture: fear, fascination, attention, and the refusal to stop looking. A less known but important consequence of all this is how it shaped human interior life. The sky did not merely organize crops or migrations, it organized feeling. It trained people to live with rhythms larger than themselves. It gave them ways to imagine return without denying loss. It offered permanence and disruption in the same field of vision. The moon returned, but the dead did not. The stars kept their seasons, but storms could still destroy. This tension may have helped form some of the oldest human habits of meaning-making hope without certainty, ritual without full control, reverence mixed with fear. These are not minor emotional tones. They are some of the central notes of civilization. What survives in the record suggests, again and again, that humans did not simply adapt to the world materially. They adapted symbolically. They needed not just warmth and food, but interpretive shelter. The night sky demanded that shelter perhaps more than any other recurring feature of life. It was too visible, too immense, too patterned, too disruptive, and too intimately tied to danger and time. To endure it, humans built not only fires and shelters, but calendars, stories, rites, authorities, and sacred places. In that sense, the fear of the sky helped build the human world below it. And yet the old fear never fully vanished. Even in the most advanced civilizations, eclipses can still alarm. Comets can still feel ominous. Thunder can still shake prayer from the chest. In modern life, under electric light and scientific certainty, the emotional force is muted but not gone. People still go quiet under a total eclipse. They still stare at meteor showers with a kind of ancient attention. They still feel exposed beneath a sky full of stars far from cities. Something in us remembers, not by direct inherited memory in any literal sense, but by structure. The human nervous system still knows what it means to stand small under darkness and wonder what is coming next. So what made early humans fear the night sky? In the end, it was not only darkness, not only predators, not only storms, not only pattern, not only death, and not only the mystery of distance. It was the convergence of all of them in one immense overhead presence that no one could escape. The sky was where vulnerability became visible. It was where order and disruption shared the same stage. It was where time announced itself before clocks, where death found scale, where memory found pattern, and where the first fragile structures of meaning began to rise against terror. That fear did not trap humanity in superstition alone. It pushed humanity into observation, into coordination, into ritual, into timekeeping, into sacred geography, and eventually into the earliest forms of civilization. The night sky frightened our ancestors because it was too large to master and too important to ignore, and by forcing them to live inside that contradiction, it may have helped make them human in the fullest sense. The fire is lower now. The brightest part of the night has already passed, and the land has settled into that quiet hour before dawn when everything feels both older and more fragile than it did at midnight. Above the dark ridges, the stars still hold their places for a little while longer. The moon, if it is there at all, has thinned or tilted or dropped toward the horizon. Somewhere far away, unseen animals move through grass or brush. Wind slips over stone. Embers breathe and dim. And around that small human circle, the old problem remains exactly as it always was. The sky is still vast. The darkness is still larger than the light. But something has changed. The people beside that fire are no longer only enduring the night. They are reading it. They are remembering it. They are placing their dead beneath it, telling stories through it, and finding in its returning patterns the first outlines of a world that can be shared across generations. They do not know what galaxies are. They do not know what causes eclipses or why meteors burn or how the moon holds its shape in emptiness. They know none of the later language. And yet they already know enough to sense that life below depends, somehow, on what happens above. They know that the sky can wound certainty and still offer rhythm. They know that darkness can terrify and still teach. They know that the lights overhead outlast every camp, every season, every living face gathered at the fire. Perhaps that is why the night sky never lost its grip on humanity. It was not only a source of fear, it was one of the first things that taught humans how small they were, without teaching them to stop paying attention. It forced them into a difficult discipline to endure what they could not control, to notice what returned, and to build meaning slowly out of uncertainty. In that discipline lies something very close to the beginning of wisdom, and so the scene remains, a little warmth on the earth, a little order against the dark, human beings looking upward, afraid, attentive, and not yet finished with what they see. The stars fade one by one as dawn begins to loosen the horizon. Night gives way, but not completely. It will come back, it always does. And when it returns, as it returned for our ancestors beyond counting, the sky will still be waiting above the edge of the fire, immense and silent, carrying with it the oldest fear and one of the oldest human responses to gather close, to remember, and to look up anyway.